They called her Trouble, a woman cursed by fate, chased from town to town across the Montana Territory. But when a tall cowboy with steady blue eyes lied to save her from a hanging rope, everything changed. This is the story of Clara Jennings, the outcast no one believed in, and Ethan Walker, the man who saw God's answer in her desperate eyes. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The gunshot cracked through the autumn air like a whip-splitting bone, and Clara Jennings knew, with the sick certainty that had followed her for 3 long years, that trouble had found her again. She stood frozen in the middle of Blackwater Creek's main street, mud splattered across the hem of her worn calico dress, her hands raised shoulder-high in surrender. 50 yards away, Sheriff Tom Briggs sat astride his bay gelding with his rifle pointed straight at her chest, his weathered face carved into hard lines of judgment. Behind him, a knot of townspeople gathered like vultures sensing carrion, their whispers rising into the cool October wind. "That's her," someone hissed. "The Jennings woman. Knew she'd bring nothing but trouble. Should have run her out the moment she rode in." Clara's breath came shallow and quick, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd only come to Blackwater Creek 3 days ago, slipping into town quiet as a shadow, hoping, praying, that this godforsaken corner of Montana Territory might finally be far enough from her past. She should have known better. She always should have known better. "Keep those hands where I can see them, miss," Sheriff Briggs called out, his voice carrying the flat authority of a man who'd made hard decisions and slept sound afterward. "Don't you move a muscle." Clara didn't move. She'd learned long ago that sudden movements around frightened men with guns only ended one way. Instead, she focused on breathing, on keeping her voice steady when she finally spoke. "Sheriff, I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake." The voice came from beside the sheriff, and Clara's stomach dropped as Harold McCaffrey urged his black stallion forward. The rancher was a thick-built man in his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and cold calculation in his pale eyes. He owned half the grazing land around Blackwater Creek and had the sheriff in his pocket. Everyone knew it, even if no one dared say it out loud. "That's my horse she's got tied behind the mercantile. Stole him right out of my north pasture yesterday evening." "I didn't steal anything," Clara said, fighting to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I don't even know what horse you're talking about." "The bay stallion with the white blaze," McCaffrey said smoothly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Worth $300 if he's worth a dime. You took him, and you're going to hang for it." The crowd's murmur grew louder, uglier. Clara recognized the sound. She'd heard it before in other towns, other confrontations. It was the sound of people convincing themselves that violence was justice, that cruelty was righteousness. "Check behind Sullivan's mercantiles," McCaffrey told the sheriff. "You'll find the horse exactly where I said." 2 deputies dismounted and disappeared down the alley beside the mercantile. Clara's mind raced. She had no horse behind that building. She'd sold her own mare 2 days ago just to afford a room at the boarding house and a hot meal. But she knew with sinking certainty that McCaffrey's stallion would be there anyway, tied and waiting like evidence at a trial she'd never get. This was a setup, but why? The deputies returned quickly, and the younger one, a sandy-haired boy who couldn't have been more than 20, nodded to the sheriff. "Bay stallion, white blaze, McCaffrey's brand on the hip, just like he said." "I've never seen that horse before in my life," Clara said desperately. "Someone's trying to frame me." "Frame you?" McCaffrey's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Girl, nobody in this town even knew your name until 3 days ago. Why would anyone bother framing a drifter?" It was a good question, one Clara couldn't answer without revealing truths she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. She couldn't tell them about her brother Luke, couldn't explain why she'd really come to Blackwater Creek, couldn't risk anyone connecting her to the Jennings name and the wanted posters that still circulated through the territories. "Sheriff," she tried again, "please, just listen. I've heard enough." Briggs lowered his rifle slightly but kept it trained in her direction. "Miss, you're under arrest for horse theft. That's a hanging offense in Montana Territory." The crowd pressed closer, their faces a blur of judgment and excitement. Clara recognized the look. She'd seen it in Colorado, in Wyoming, in Kansas. The look of people who'd already decided she was guilty, who saw her presence as confirmation of their own prejudices. She's cursed, an old woman near the front whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Everywhere she goes, trouble follows. Heard she's got 3 husbands buried back east, another voice added. My cousin said she burned down a church in Denver. None of it was true, but the lies spread like wildfire anyway, mixing with older rumors, older accusations. Claire had learned that truth didn't matter when people needed someone to blame. Sheriff Briggs dismounted and approached her slowly, cautiously, as if she might bolt or pull a hidden weapon. Clara stood perfectly still, her mind frantically searching for options that didn't exist. She could run, but she'd never make it past the deputies. She could fight, but a woman alone against a dozen armed men was a math equation that ended only one way. Turn around, the sheriff ordered. Hands behind your back. Clara's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. This couldn't be how it ended. Not here. Not like this. She'd survived 3 years on the run, had clawed her way through poverty and prejudice and the endless weight of other people's sins. She couldn't let it end on a rope in some nowhere town in Montana. But as the sheriff's rough hands gripped her wrists, as she felt the cold bite of iron shackles closing around her arms, Clara realized she was out of miracles. Then a voice cut through the chaos, calm, steady, and completely unexpected. She was at my ranch all day yesterday. Every head turned. The crowd parted, and a man stepped forward from where he'd been leaning against the post outside the general store. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, weathered build of someone who'd spent his life working hard land. He wore dusty work clothes and a battered Stetson, and his face was tanned from long days under the Montana sun. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention, steady blue eyes that met hers for just a heartbeat before turning to the sheriff, eyes that held no judgment, only certainty. "Who the hell are you?" McCaffrey demanded. "Ethan Walker." The man touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that managed to be both polite and dismissive. "Foreman at the Double W Ranch, 12 miles northwest. And I'm telling you, Sheriff, this woman couldn't have stolen that horse yesterday evening because she was at my ranch from sunup to sundown." Sheriff Briggs frowned. "The Double W? That's Will Peterson's spread." "That's right." Ethan's voice remained perfectly level, as if he were discussing the weather rather than providing an alibi for a suspected horse thief. "Miss Jennings came looking for work yesterday morning. We had her helping in the kitchen and mending tack. She didn't leave until well after dark." It was a lie. A complete, beautiful, inexplicable lie, and Claire had no idea why this stranger was telling it. McCaffrey's face darkened. "That's impossible. I saw my horse missing yesterday evening, and then maybe your horse went missing this morning," Ethan interrupted smoothly. "Or maybe someone borrowed him without asking. But I can tell you for certain that Miss Jennings was nowhere near your north pasture yesterday." The sheriff looked between Ethan and McCaffrey, his expression troubled. The Double W Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the territory. Will Peterson was known as an honest man, and his word carried weight. If his foreman was willing to swear to an alibi, that wasn't something Briggs could easily dismiss. "You'd testify to that in court?" the sheriff asked. "I would," Ethan said firmly, "and so would every hand who was at the ranch yesterday. We had 6 men working, and they all saw Miss Jennings there." Clara's breath caught in her throat. This man, this complete stranger, was risking his reputation, possibly his freedom, to save her. But why? They'd never met. She'd never set foot on the Double W Ranch. He had absolutely no reason to lie for her. Unless he knew something, unless he'd recognized her somehow, connected her to Luke, to the past she'd been running from. McCaffrey's jaw clenched. "This is convenient, Walker. Real convenient. A drifter shows up in town, my horse gets stolen, and suddenly she's got the foreman of the Double W vouching for her?" "I don't deal in convenience, McCaffrey," Ethan said quietly. "I deal in truth. And the truth is, you're accusing an innocent woman." The 2 men stared at each other, and Clara sensed currents running beneath the confrontation that she didn't understand. There was history here, bad blood simmering just below the surface. Finally, Sheriff Briggs exhaled heavily and unlocked the shackles around Clara's wrists. "Well, if Walker's willing to swear she was at the Double W, I can't very well arrest her. Not without more evidence." "This is ridiculous," McCaffrey exploded. The horse was tied behind the mercantile. Someone put him there. Then maybe you should figure out who, Ethan suggested mildly, before you go accusing innocent people. McCaffrey's face flushed dark red, but he bit back whatever retort had been forming. Instead, he wheeled his stallion around and jabbed his spurs hard into the animal's flanks, sending him lunging forward through the crowd. His deputies followed, and gradually the townspeople began to disperse, though Clara could feel their stares lingering on her back like physical touches. The sheriff studied Clara for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I'd suggest you stay out of trouble, miss. Blackwater Creek isn't fond of drifters, and if anything else goes wrong, I won't be so quick to believe convenient alibis." "Understood, Sheriff," Clara managed. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, thin and distant. Briggs nodded and mounted his horse, leaving Clara standing alone in the street with the stranger who'd just saved her life. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Clara rubbed her wrists where the shackles had bitten into her skin, trying to organize her scattered thoughts into something coherent. Around them, Blackwater Creek settled back into its normal rhythms, horses clopping past, shopkeepers returning to their stores, the piano in the saloon resuming its tinny melody. Finally, Clara found her voice. "Why?" Ethan Walker turned those steady blue eyes on her, and for the first time she saw something flicker in their depths. Not suspicion or judgment, but something that looked almost like recognition. "Because you looked like someone who deserved a second chance," he said simply. "You don't know me," Clara said. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." Ethan glanced toward the end of the street where McCaffrey had disappeared. "And I know Harold McCaffrey. If he's trying to railroad someone, there's usually a reason, and it's never a good one. That doesn't explain why you'd risk your reputation to save a stranger." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost meditative. 6 months ago, I was caught in a blizzard up in the high country. My horse went down, and I was sure I'd freeze to death before morning. I prayed, really prayed, for the first time in years. Asked God to show me why he'd spare my life if he did. He looked at Clara directly. "When I saw you in that street, with that mob ready to hang you for something you didn't do, I heard an answer. Maybe this is why." Clara stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You think God sent you to save me?" "I think," Ethan said carefully, "that sometimes we're put in places where we can do the right thing. And sometimes the right thing is standing between an innocent person and a rope." "I'm not innocent," Clara said before she could stop herself. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Not judgment, but understanding. "None of us are, Miss Jennings, but that doesn't mean we deserve to hang for crimes we didn't commit." The way he said her name, with such certainty, made Clara's blood run cold. "How do you know my name?" "The sheriff said it when he was arresting you." It was true, but Clara didn't quite believe it. There was something in Ethan Walker's eyes, some knowledge that went deeper than a name spoken in the street. "What do you want from me?" she asked warily. "Nothing." Ethan adjusted his hat. "But if you need a place to stay while things cool down, the Double W always needs help. We don't pay much, but it's honest work, and Will Peterson doesn't judge people by their past. I have a room at the boarding house." "Had a room," Ethan corrected gently. "Mrs. Henderson won't keep a room for someone accused of horse theft, even if the charges didn't stick. The whole town saw what happened here. You'll be lucky if anyone sells you a meal, let alone rents you a bed." Clara's stomach sank because she knew he was right. She'd seen it happen too many times before, the way rumors and accusations clung to a person like tar, staining everything they touched. Even with Ethan's alibi, she'd become the woman who'd been accused, the drifter who'd brought trouble to Blackwater Creek. "So what?" she asked bitterly. "I'm supposed to just leave, run to the next town and wait for the next accusation?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "You're supposed to stay and let people see they were wrong about you. That's how you stop running." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not." Ethan's tone remained infuriatingly calm. "But I know what I saw in that street just now. I saw a woman who's been running for a long time, and I saw a moment where she decided she was done running. Was I wrong?" Clara wanted to tell him yes, that he was completely wrong, that she'd been ready to bolt the second those shackles came off. But the words stuck in her throat because some small, stubborn part of her, The part that had survived 3 years of running, that had clawed through poverty and loneliness and the endless weight of her brother's sins. That part was so tired of being afraid. "There's something else," Ethan said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. "Something you should know. About why you really came to Blackwater Creek." Clara went very still. "I don't know what you mean." "Luke Jennings," Ethan said, and Clara felt the world tilt sideways. "Your brother, he's alive." The street seemed to spin around her. "That's impossible. Luke was killed in a shootout in Colorado 3 years ago. I saw the bounty notice. You saw what they wanted you to see," Ethan interrupted gently. "Luke's alive, Clara. Wounded, hiding, but alive. And he's at my ranch." Clara couldn't breathe. For 3 years, she'd carried the weight of her brother's death like a stone in her chest. She'd run from town to town, always one step ahead of the men who thought she might know where Luke had hidden his stolen money, always carrying the grief of having lost the only family she had left. And now this stranger was telling her it had all been a lie. "How?" she whispered. "How do you know Luke?" "He showed up at the ranch 2 months ago, half dead from blood loss and fever. Said his name was Luke Martin, but I recognized him from the wanted posters. I should have turned him in." Ethan's jaw tightened. "But he was dying, and something told me he deserved a chance to make things right. So I hit him, nursed him back to health, and then he told me about you, about his sister who'd been on the run, trying to escape the shadow of his mistakes." "Why are you telling me this?" Claire's voice cracked. "Why help us?" "Because Luke made a mistake," Ethan said simply. "A bad one. But he's trying to atone for it, trying to become a better man. And because you don't deserve to pay for his sins. Nobody does." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears that had been building for 3 long years. Luke was alive. Her brother, her reckless, foolish, beloved brother, was alive. "The horse," she said suddenly. "McCaffrey's horse." "Did Luke?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "That was McCaffrey's doing. He's been trying to run the Double W out of business for months now, buying up water rights and pressuring Peterson to sell. When he found out we'd been sheltering someone, I think he decided to use you to get to us. Frame you for horse theft, then offer to drop the charges if Peterson hands over his land." "That's illegal." "So is half of what McCaffrey does. But he's rich and connected, and out here that counts for more than the law." Ethan's expression hardened. "He's dangerous, Clara. And if you stay in Blackwater Creek, he'll come after you again. Not because you did anything wrong, but because hurting you hurts us." Clara closed her eyes, trying to process everything. 20 minutes ago, she'd been sure she was going to hang. Now she was being told her dead brother was alive, that she'd been framed by a corrupt rancher, and that the only people willing to help her were strangers who had no reason to care. It was too much, too impossible. But when she opened her eyes and looked at Ethan Walker, really looked at him, she didn't see deception or hidden motives. She saw steady certainty, the kind of bone-deep conviction that came from a man who'd made his peace with hard choices. "Why should I trust you?" she asked quietly. "You shouldn't," Ethan admitted. "I'm a stranger who just told you an impossible story. But Clara, your brother is 12 miles from here, and he's been waiting 2 months to see you, to tell you he's sorry, to try and make things right." He held her gaze. "Even if you don't trust me, you owe it to yourself to find out if I'm telling the truth." Clara looked down at her hands, rough, calloused hands that had scrubbed floors and mended clothes and done 100 other desperate jobs just to survive. She thought about the last 3 years, about all the towns she'd fled, all the accusations she'd endured, all the nights she'd lain awake wondering if Luke had suffered when he died. And she thought about what Ethan had said, that sometimes the right thing was standing between an innocent person and a rope. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to stand and fight. "Okay," she said finally. "Take me to my brother." Ethan nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "My horse is at the livery. We can leave as soon as you're ready. I need to get my things from the boarding house." "I'll come with you," Ethan said, "just in case Mrs. Henderson decides to make trouble." They walked together down Blackwater Creek's main street, and Clara felt the weight of 100 stares following them. She heard the whispers, felt the judgment, tasted the familiar bitterness of being unwanted. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, someone was walking beside her. Someone who'd risked everything to give her a chance. Mrs. Henderson was waiting at the boarding house with Clara's few possessions already packed in a worn carpet bag. The older woman's face was pinched with disapproval as she thrust the bag at Clara. "I run a respectable establishment," Mrs. Henderson said coldly. "I won't have thieves under my roof." "She's not a thief," Ethan said quietly. The whole town saw Harold McCaffrey try to frame an innocent woman," Ethan interrupted. "And if you spread rumors that suggest otherwise, Mrs. Henderson, you might find yourself answering questions about where you were when that horse got tied behind the mercantile." The landlady's face went pale. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm reminding you that false accusations can cut both ways," Ethan said mildly. "Now, if you'll excuse us." They left Mrs. Henderson sputtering on the porch, and Clara allowed herself a small, bitter smile. Maybe she'd found someone who understood what it was like to stand against the tide of public opinion. At the livery, Ethan saddled a tall roan gelding and helped Clara mount behind him. She'd ridden double before, too many times to count, fleeing too many places. But this felt different. Ethan's back was solid and warm in front of her, and she found herself clinging to him not out of fear, but out of something else entirely. Hope, maybe, or the fragile beginning of trust. They rode out of Blackwater Creek as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The Montana landscape opened up around them, rolling grasslands studded with sage, distant peaks crowned with early snow, a sky so vast and blue it made Clara's chest ache. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running. She was riding toward something instead of away from it. "Tell me about Luke," she said, after they'd ridden in silence for a while. "How is he?" "Better than he was," Ethan said. "The bullet wound got infected and we nearly lost him twice. But he's strong, stubborn too. Reminds me of someone else I just met." Clara felt a smile tug at her lips despite everything. "That sounds like Luke. He never knew when to quit." "He talks about you constantly," Ethan continued. "About how he ruined your life, how everything that happened was his fault. He carries a lot of guilt, Clara." "He should," Clara said, then immediately felt ashamed of the bitterness in her voice. "I'm sorry, it's just... Do you know what the last 3 years have been like? Everywhere I go, people recognize the Jennings name. They think I know where Luke hid the money from that bank robbery, think I'm somehow complicit. I've been chased out of 5 towns. I've had men try to hurt me to get information I don't have." Her voice broke. "I thought he was dead, and I was so angry at him for dying and leaving me alone. And now you're telling me he's been alive this whole time, and I don't know whether to be happy or furious." "You can be both," Ethan said gently. "Anger and love aren't mutually exclusive, especially not when it comes to family." They rode on through the lengthening shadows, following a narrow trail that wound through the grasslands toward distant timber. Clara watched the landscape roll past, trying to imagine what she would say when she saw Luke again, trying to prepare herself for the moment when 3 years of grief and anger and desperate loneliness came face to face with the brother who'd caused it all. "There," Ethan said finally, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. "The Double W." The ranch was smaller than Clara expected. A main house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse arranged around a central yard. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and she could see horses in a corral, cattle grazing on the hillsides beyond. It looked peaceful, normal, like the kind of place where people built lives instead of running from them. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, older than Ethan, with white hair and a weathered face creased by years of laughter and hard weather. He saw them coming and raised a hand in greeting. "That's Will Peterson," Ethan said. "The man who owns all this. Best man I've ever known." They dismounted in the yard and Will approached with a warm smile that faded slightly when he saw Clara's expression. "Ethan," he said carefully, "want to tell me what happened in town?" "Long story," Ethan said, "but the short version is that McCaffrey tried to frame Miss Clara Jennings for horse theft, and I may have provided her with an alibi that wasn't strictly accurate. Will's eyebrows rose, but he didn't look angry, just thoughtful. Well, I imagine you had a good reason. McCaffrey's been asking for trouble for months now. He turned to Clara and touched his hat brim. Welcome to the Double W, miss. Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here. Thank you, Clara managed. Mr. Peterson, I should tell you that your brother's been hiding in my hayloft for 2 months? Will's eyes crinkled with amusement. Yes, I know. Ethan and I don't keep secrets from each other. Luke's a good man who made bad choices. We've all been there. Clara felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. These men, these strangers, had risked so much for her and Luke without asking for anything in return. It was almost incomprehensible after 3 years of being met with suspicion and cruelty at every turn. He's been asking about you every day, Will continued gently, hoping you'd find your way here. I think Ethan here was starting to lose faith that you would. I didn't know, Clara whispered. I didn't know he was alive. I thought... The words caught in her throat. Will's expression softened with understanding. Come on, then. Let's not keep him waiting any longer. They crossed the yard to the barn, and with every step Clara's heart hammered harder against her ribs. 3 years. 3 years of believing her brother was dead, of carrying grief and anger and guilt for not being able to save him from his own reckless choices. And now she was about to see him again. Ethan opened the barn door, and they stepped into the dimness within. The smell of hay and horses and leather surrounded them, familiar and comforting. Ethan led them to a ladder at the back. Luke, he called up, you've got a visitor. Silence for a heartbeat. Then a voice, thin, uncertain, achingly familiar, drifted down from the loft above. Clara? Her breath caught. Tears she'd been holding back for 3 years suddenly broke free, streaming down her face. Luke, she managed, I'm here. A figure appeared at the top of the ladder, thin, bearded, moving slowly like someone still recovering from serious injury. But even in the dim light, Clara recognized him, her brother, her family, alive. Luke climbed down the ladder with obvious effort, and when he reached the bottom and turned to face her, Clara saw that he was crying too. His face was gaunt, shadowed with pain and regret, but his eyes, Luke's eyes, the same bright hazel she remembered, were full of desperate hope. Clara, he breathed. God, Clara, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then they were holding each other, both of them sobbing, 3 years of grief and fear and loneliness pouring out in the musty darkness of a Montana barn. Clara buried her face in her brother's shoulder. He was thinner than she remembered, fragile, and felt the weight of guilt and anger begin to shift, making room for something else. Forgiveness, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. I thought you were dead, she said when she could finally speak. For 3 years, Luke, I thought you were dead. I wanted to be, Luke said hoarsely. After what I did, after what I put you through, I wished I had died. But God or fate or just dumb luck kept me breathing, and I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to make things right. Clara pulled back to look at him properly. The last time she'd seen her brother, he'd been full of reckless energy and bad decisions. Now he looked hollowed out by suffering and regret. The money, she said, from the bank robbery. Do you still have it? Luke's face crumpled. No, I never had it, Clara. That whole thing was a setup. I was working as a guard at that bank in Colorado, and some men I thought were friends convinced me to help them rob it. They told me no one would get hurt, that we'd all share the take. His voice turned bitter. But they shot the manager and 2 customers, killed them in cold blood. And then they shot me and left me for dead, taking all the money with them. Clara stared at him. What? I was their patsy, Luke said. The only guard who supposedly survived the robbery. When I woke up in the doctor's office 3 days later, there were wanted posters with my face on them. Everyone thought I'd masterminded the whole thing, that I'd hidden the money somewhere. He laughed, a broken sound. I've been running ever since, and every bounty hunter and 2-bit criminal in the territories thinks I know where a fortune is buried. But there's nothing, Clara. No money, no fortune. Just a stupid kid who trusted the wrong people and destroyed his sister's life in the process. Clara felt the last 3 years rearranged themselves in her mind, all the assumptions and accusations shifting into a new, terrible pattern. Luke hadn't betrayed anyone, he'd been betrayed. And she'd spent 3 years hating him for crimes he didn't actually commit. "Why didn't you find me?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell me you were alive?" "Because I didn't want them to find you," Luke said desperately. "The men who actually robbed that bank, they know I have a sister. I figured if they thought I was dead, they'd leave you alone. I never wanted you dragged into this, Clara. Never." "You're an idiot," Clara said, but there was no heat in it, just exhaustion and the faint stirrings of relief. "A noble, self-sacrificing idiot." "That's fair," Luke admitted. They stood there in the barn, brother and sister reunited after 3 years of loss and lies, neither quite sure what to say next. Finally, Clara became aware of Ethan and Will watching from a respectful distance, giving them space but remaining close in case they were needed. "These men," Clara said quietly, "Ethan and Mr. Peterson, they saved your life." "I know," Luke said. "I owe them everything. Hell, I owe Ethan my soul. He could have turned me in, collected the bounty, been set for life. Instead, he hid me, nursed me back to health, and never asked for a thing in return." Clara looked over at Ethan, who was watching them with those steady blue eyes. He met her gaze and nodded slightly, as if to say, "This is why." "McCaffrey tried to frame me for horse theft today," Clara said to Luke. "Ethan lied to save me, gave me an alibi that put me at this ranch when the horse was supposedly stolen." Luke's face darkened. "McCaffrey knows about me. He's been sniffing around, asking questions. I think he's figured out that Will is protecting someone, and he's trying to use that as leverage." "That's about the size of it," Will said, stepping forward. "Harold McCaffrey wants my water rights, and he's not above blackmail or worse to get them. If he can prove I'm harboring a wanted man, he can force me to sell. Or worse, have the ranch seized by the territorial authorities." "Then Luke needs to leave," Clara said immediately. "We both do. If we're gone, McCaffrey has no leverage." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Running won't solve this. McCaffrey will just find another way to come after Will, and you'll spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders." "What choice do we have?" Clara demanded. "Turn Luke over to the law. He'll hang for crimes he didn't commit." "There's another option," Will said thoughtfully. "We fight back. We find the men who actually robbed that bank and make them confess. Clear Luke's name properly." "That's impossible," Luke said flatly. "Those men are probably long gone, and even if we could find them, why would they confess?" "Maybe they wouldn't," Ethan agreed. "But here's what I know about men like that. They don't disappear. They stay in the territories, spending their ill-gotten money, looking for the next score. And men who talk in saloons eventually say things they shouldn't." "It would take months to track them down," Clara protested. "Maybe years. And in the meantime, we're sitting ducks for McCaffrey." "So we deal with McCaffrey first," Ethan said. "Make it clear that coming after the Double W or anyone associated with it is a losing proposition." "How?" Clara asked skeptically. Ethan's expression hardened. "By standing together, by refusing to be intimidated, and by making sure everyone in Blackwater Creek knows that Harold McCaffrey tried to frame an innocent woman." He looked at Clara. "You wanted to stop running. This is what that looks like." Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her. He was right, of course. Running had never solved anything. It had just postponed the inevitable confrontation, stretched out her suffering across 3 years and 5 towns. But standing and fighting, that was terrifying in a whole different way. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Luke said with unexpected intensity. "Clara, you've survived 3 years of hell because of me. You've faced down bounty hunters and angry mobs and God knows what else. If anyone's strong enough, it's you." "Your brother's right," Will added gently, "and you won't be facing it alone. Whatever happens, the Double W stands with you, both of you." Clara looked between the 3 men. Her brother, damaged and desperate to make amends, Will Peterson, who'd opened his home to strangers, and Ethan Walker, The man who'd lied to save her life and then offered her something she hadn't dared hope for in 3 long years. A chance. A real chance to stop running and start living. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. We stand and fight." Ethan smiled. A genuine, warm smile that transformed his face. "Good. Then tomorrow, we start making a plan." They moved from the barn to the main house, where Will's wife, Martha, a practical woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron, immediately took Clara under her wing. She showed her to a small but clean room upstairs, brought her fresh clothes and hot water for washing, and refused to hear any objections when Clara tried to protest the generosity. "Ethan says you've had a hard day," Martha said simply, "and anyone Ethan vouches for is family here. Now wash up, and I'll have supper ready in an hour." Later, sitting around the Petersons' dinner table with Luke, Ethan, Will, and Martha, Clara realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this safe. The food was simple but plentiful. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and the conversation flowed easily around her. No one pressed her for details about her past. No one looked at her with suspicion or judgment. For the first time in 3 years, Claire Jennings felt like a person instead of a problem. After dinner, Ethan walked her out to the porch while the others cleaned up. The Montana night had settled cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky in impossible abundance. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and leaned against the porch railing, breathing in air that smelled of sage and pine and the distant promise of snow. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything you've done. For Luke, for me. I don't know how to repay you." "I don't want repayment," Ethan said quietly. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night. "I told you why I did it." "Because you think God sent you to save me," Clara said, and she couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Because I think sometimes we're given chances to do the right thing," Ethan corrected, "and I've learned not to question those moments too closely." Clara was quiet for a long moment, studying his profile in the starlight. "Who are you, Ethan Walker? Really?" "Just a man trying to figure out his purpose," Ethan said. "I've been drifting since that blizzard 6 months ago, going through the motions of living without really understanding why. And then today when I saw you in that street with that mob closing in, something clicked into place, like maybe all those months of questions finally had an answer." "That's a lot of weight to put on a stranger," Clara said softly. "Maybe," Ethan agreed. Ethan says, "But tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that when our eyes met in that street, you didn't feel something shift." Clara wanted to deny it, wanted to laugh off his intensity as the delusion of a man who'd spent too long alone. But she couldn't, because he was right. In that moment when their eyes had met, when he'd stepped forward to lie for her, something had changed. Some possibility had opened up that hadn't existed before. "I don't believe in miracles," she said instead. "Neither did I," Ethan said. "Until 6 months ago when I should have died, and didn't. Sometimes faith isn't about believing in miracles. It's about recognizing them when they happen." Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Luke stepped out onto the porch. He looked better than he had in the barn. Some color in his face, some of the old spark returning to his eyes. "Interrupting?" he asked. "No," Clara said quickly. "We were just talking." Luke studied them both for a moment, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Sure you were." He turned to Ethan. "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for helping Clara today, but for everything. For saving my worthless hide when you had no reason to." "Your hide's not worthless," Ethan said. "Damaged, maybe. Complicated, definitely. But not worthless." "You're too generous," Luke said. "And I swear to you, I'll find a way to make this right. I'll clear my name, clear Clara's name, and I'll make sure McCaffrey can't hurt any of you." "We'll do it together," Ethan said firmly. "That's how this works. We stand together or we fall apart." Luke nodded slowly, then turned to his sister. "Clara, can we talk? Alone?" Clara glanced at Ethan, who nodded and stepped back into the house. When they were alone on the porch, Luke took her hands in his. His grip was weak, his hands still trembling slightly from his lingering fever. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," he said quietly. "After everything I've put you through, after all the pain I've caused. But Clara, I need you to know something. I need you to know that these men, Ethan and Will, they're good people, the kind of people we should have been lucky enough to know our whole lives. I know, Clara said. And I need you to know that when this is over, when my name is cleared and you're safe, I don't expect you to stay with me. I don't expect forgiveness or family or anything else. You've earned the right to build your own life, away from my mistakes. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. Luke, you're my brother. You're my family. That doesn't just go away. Maybe it should, Luke said, his voice rough with emotion. Maybe you deserve better. Maybe I do, Clara agreed. But you don't get to make that choice for me. I've spent 3 years running from your shadow. If I'm going to stop running, it's going to be on my terms. And that means you don't get to push me away just because you think it's noble. Luke stared at her, and then he laughed. A genuine, surprised laugh that sounded more like the brother she remembered. When did you get so damn stubborn? I've always been stubborn, Clara said. You were just too reckless to notice. They stood together on the porch, brother and sister reunited, and for the first time in 3 years, Clara felt something like hope take root in her chest. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was there. A tiny spark of possibility that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. Inside the house, she could hear the low murmur of conversation, the clink of dishes being washed, the ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives. It was such a contrast to the chaos of the day, to the years of running and fear and desperate survival. Tomorrow, they would start planning their fight against McCaffrey. Tomorrow, they would begin the long process of clearing Luke's name and building a future that didn't involve looking over their shoulders. But tonight, Clara Jennings stood on a porch in Montana Territory and allowed herself to simply breathe, to be present in this moment, in this place, with people who had chosen to stand beside her when the whole world seemed determined to see her hang. And as she looked up at the vast Montana sky, at stars that had witnessed centuries of human struggle and triumph, Clara made herself a promise. She was done running, done letting fear dictate her choices, done letting other people's sins and judgments define who she was. The woman the town called Trouble was about to show them what real trouble looked like, the kind that fought back, that refused to be broken, that turned pain into purpose and fear into fierce determination. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Clara Jennings slept without nightmares. Dawn broke cold and bright over the Double W Ranch, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clara woke to the sound of roosters crowing and men's voices drifting up from the yard below, and for a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The accusation, the near hanging, Ethan's lie. Luke alive. And she sat up in bed with her heart racing. Through the window, she could see Ethan and 3 ranch hands working in the corral, their breath misting in the cool morning air as they sorted cattle. Even from this distance, she recognized Ethan's tall frame, the easy confidence with which he moved among the animals. He was giving instructions to the other men, pointing toward different sections of the herd, and they listened with the respect accorded to someone who'd earned his authority through competence rather than merely claimed it. Clara dressed quickly in the simple work dress Martha had loaned her and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was already alive with activity. Martha kneading bread dough at the counter, Will reading a week-old newspaper at the table, and Luke sitting in the corner looking pale but determined. "Morning," Martha said cheerfully. "Coffee's hot, and there's biscuits and bacon keeping warm on the stove. Help yourself." Clara poured coffee into a tin cup and sat down across from her brother. He looked better in the daylight. Some of the shadows had lifted from his eyes, but she could still see the toll his wounds and months of hiding had taken. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. "Like I got shot and spent 2 months sleeping in a hayloft," Luke said with a wry smile. "But better. Clara, we need to talk about what happens next. Ethan said we'd make a plan today. I know, but before we do, I need to tell you everything. About the robbery, about the men who framed me, about why McCaffrey's really after this ranch." Luke glanced at Will, who nodded encouragingly. "You deserve to know what you're fighting for." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, bracing herself. "Okay. Tell me." Luke took a deep breath. The bank robbery in Colorado. It happened 3 years ago in a town called Silverton. I was working as a guard there, trying to make an honest living after some bad years. I'd fallen in with a group of men I thought were friends. Jack Reeves was the ringleader, smooth talker, always had money for drinks, seemed like a decent enough fellow. His voice turned bitter. Turns out he was scouting the bank, learning the routines, figuring out the weak points. And I was his inside man, whether I knew it or not. What happened? Clara asked. One night, Jack and 2 others, Cole Brennan and a man named Silas Finch, came to me with a proposition. They said the bank manager was corrupt, skimming money from accounts, ruining honest people's lives. They wanted to rob him specifically, take only what he'd stolen, redistribute it to the people he'd wronged. Luke laughed bitterly. I was young and stupid, and I believed them. Thought I was some kind of Robin Hood, stealing from the corrupt rich to help the poor. Oh, Luke, Clara whispered. I gave them information about the guards' schedules, about when the vault would be most vulnerable. I thought I was helping right or wrong. His hands clenched into fists on the table. But on the night of the robbery, everything went sideways. The manager wasn't corrupt. He was just a family man trying to do his job. When he tried to stop them, Jack shot him. Then he shot 2 customers who'd seen their faces, and then they shot me and left me bleeding on the floor with the safe empty and blood everywhere. Will reached over and squeezed Luke's shoulder. You couldn't have known. I should have known, Luke said harshly. I should have seen through Jack's lies, but I didn't, and 3 innocent people died because I was too damn gullible. He looked at Clara. When I woke up 3 days later, the whole town thought I'd planned it. The only guard who survived such a brutal robbery? Had to be an inside job, they said. And they were right. It was an inside job, just not the way they thought. What about the money? Clara asked. Where did it go? Jack and his men took it. I found out later they'd stolen nearly $50,000. They disappeared into the territories, and I became the most wanted man in Colorado. Luke's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I ran because I knew no one would believe me. I ran because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done, even if I hadn't pulled the trigger myself. And I let you take the consequences of my cowardice. Clara was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. 3 innocent people dead, $50,000 gone. Her brother framed and hunted. And somewhere out there, 3 killers spending blood money and laughing about the fool they'd left holding the blame. Where are they now? She asked finally. Jack Reeves and the others? That's where it gets interesting, Will interjected, and where Harold McCaffrey comes into the picture. Clara's head snapped up. What does McCaffrey have to do with this? 2 months ago, when Luke first told me this story, something bothered me, Will said. The name Silas Finch sounded familiar, so I did some digging, sent some telegrams to contacts I have in Denver and Cheyenne. Turns out Silas Finch isn't his real name. It's Silas McCaffrey, Harold's younger brother. The kitchen went silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Clara stared at Will, her mind racing. You're saying Harold McCaffrey's brother was one of the men who robbed that bank? And killed those people, Will confirmed. Which means Harold knows exactly where at least some of that stolen money is. My guess? He's been using it to buy up land and water rights, building his empire on blood money. But why come after Luke now? Clara demanded. If Silas has the money and Luke's been out of the picture for 3 years, why suddenly care about him hiding at this ranch? Because Luke's not just a witness to the robbery, Ethan said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with hay stuck to his shirt and dust on his face. He's proof that Silas and Jack and Cole are the real killers. If Luke's name ever gets cleared, if the truth comes out about what really happened that night, every piece of property Harold McCaffrey bought with that stolen money becomes evidence. He'd lose everything. Clara's blood ran cold. So McCaffrey knows Luke is here. He suspects, Ethan corrected. He doesn't have proof yet, but he's been watching the ranch, asking questions in town, trying to force Will's hand. Yesterday, when you rode into Blackwater Creek, he saw an opportunity. Frame you for horse theft, use you as leverage against us. But it didn't work, Clara said slowly. Because you lied for me. Which means McCaffrey knows we're protecting something, Will said grimly. He just doesn't know exactly what. But he'll keep pushing until he figures it out. Clara stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the ranch hands were leading horses toward the barn, preparing for a day's work. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, but underneath that peaceful surface, a war was brewing. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We can't fight McCaffrey directly. He's rich, connected, and he has the law on his side." "We do what should have been done 3 years ago," Ethan said firmly. "We find Jack Reeves and Cole Brennan. We make them confess, and we clear Luke's name with the truth." "That's impossible," Luke protested. "Those men could be anywhere in the territories by now. We don't have resources to track them down, and even if we did, why would they confess to murders they've gotten away with?" "Because men like that don't just disappear," Ethan said. "They stay in the game. They drink in saloons and play cards in back rooms and brag about their exploits when they think no one's listening, and every man has a weakness we can exploit." "You sound like you've done this before," Clara observed. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. "I have. Before I came to the Double W, I worked as a bounty hunter for 5 years. I know how to track men who don't want to be found, and I know how to make them talk when I find them." There was something hard in his voice, something that spoke of a past Clara didn't fully understand. She found herself wondering what had driven Ethan from bounty hunting to ranch work, what shadows he carried beneath that steady, calm exterior. "Even if we could track them down," Luke said, "we'd need proof. Confessions alone won't clear my name. We'd need evidence that ties them to the crime." "The money," Martha said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She wiped flour from her hands and met their gazes steadily. "If Silas McCaffrey has been using the stolen money, there's a paper trail. Bank deposits, land purchases, wire transfers. Find the money, and you find the proof." "Martha's right," Will said. "Harold's been buying up property for the past 2 years, paying cash for prime land that should have been out of his price range. If we can prove that money came from the Silverton robbery, we can connect him to Silas and the murders." "How do we get access to his bank records?" Clara asked. "Carefully," Ethan said. "And probably not legally, but I know someone in town who might be willing to help. Abigail Thornton. She works as a clerk in the Territorial Bank. She's got no love for McCaffrey after he tried to foreclose on her father's farm last year." "You're talking about breaking the law," Luke said incredulously. "After everything we've just discussed about clearing my name legally." "Sometimes you have to bend the law to serve justice," Ethan replied. "And I'd rather face charges for stealing bank records than watch you hang for crimes you didn't commit." Clara looked at this man who'd already risked so much for them. His reputation, his freedom, his very life if things went wrong. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk all of this for us?" Ethan met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. "Because 3 years ago, you lost everything to protect your brother. You've been running and suffering and carrying guilt that wasn't yours to carry. Someone needs to stand up for you, Clara. Someone needs to fight for the justice you deserve." The intensity in his voice, in his eyes, made Clara's breath catch. This wasn't just about clearing Luke's name or stopping McCaffrey. This was personal for Ethan in a way she was only beginning to understand. "We'll need a plan," Will said, breaking the charged moment. "A real one, not just hope and good intentions. If we're going after Harold McCaffrey, we need to be smart about it." They spent the next 3 hours around the kitchen table, plotting and planning. Ethan would ride into town and make contact with Abigail Thornton, feel out whether she'd be willing to help access McCaffrey's bank records. Will would send telegrams to his contacts in Colorado, requesting copies of any official documents related to the Silverton robbery. Luke would stay hidden at the ranch, but work on writing down everything he remembered about Jack Reeves and Cole Brennan. Their habits, their associates, anything that might help track them down. And Clara would ride into Blackwater Creek with Ethan, showing the town that she wasn't afraid of their judgment. Showing McCaffrey that his attempt to frame her had failed. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked her as they prepared to leave later that morning. "Going back into town so soon after yesterday? People won't have forgotten." "I'm sure," Clara said, checking the cinch on the horse Will had loaned her, a steady gray mare named Silver. "If I hide out here, McCaffrey wins. He gets to paint me as guilty without a trial, and the town gets to believe their worst assumptions about me. I won't give them that satisfaction. Ethan smiled, a genuine expression of admiration. You're braver than you know. Or more stubborn than I should be, Clara countered. There's a fine line. They rode out as the morning sun climbed higher, following the same trail they'd taken the day before but in reverse. The Montana landscape stretched vast and beautiful around them, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind was too busy turning over the revelations of the morning, trying to fit all the pieces together. Can I ask you something? She said, after they'd ridden in silence for a while. Anything. You said you used to be a bounty hunter. What made you stop? Ethan was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, his shoulders tensing with some old pain. 5 years ago, I was tracking a man named Thomas Wright. He'd robbed a stage and shot the driver. $300 bounty on his head, dead or alive. Ethan's voice was flat, carefully controlled. I tracked him for 2 weeks through Wyoming territory, finally cornered him in a canyon near Laramie. He drew on me, and I shot him. Clean kill, right through the heart. He paused, and Clara waited. Turned out Thomas Wright had a wife and 3 kids. The stage robbery? He'd done it to pay for medicine for his sick daughter. The driver he shot? That was self-defense. The driver had pulled a gun first, thinking Wright was trying to rob him. Ethan's jaw tightened. I collected my bounty. The daughter died 2 weeks later, and I realized I'd become the kind of man who put money over mercy, who killed without asking questions about right and wrong. That wasn't your fault, Clara said softly. You were doing your job. That's what I told myself, Ethan agreed, but it didn't make me sleep any better, so I quit bounty hunting, drifted for a while, and eventually ended up at the Double W. Will gave me a job without asking too many questions about my past. I've been trying to be a better man ever since. Is that why you saved me yesterday? Trying to balance some cosmic scale? No, Ethan said firmly. I saved you because you deserved saving. Because I looked in your eyes and saw someone who'd been fighting her whole life just to survive, and I thought maybe I could help make that fight a little easier. He glanced at her. And because when I prayed in that blizzard 6 months ago, I asked God to show me what I was supposed to do with the life I'd been given. Maybe you're the answer to that prayer. Clara wanted to argue, to push back against the weight of expectation and meaning he was putting on their meeting. But she couldn't, because part of her, the part that had felt something shift when their eyes met in that street, believed him. They rode into Blackwater Creek just before noon, and Clara felt every eye in town turn toward them. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Shop doors opened as people stepped out to stare. The whispers started immediately, following them down the main street like a rising tide. That's her, the horse thief. Shameless coming back here. You see? She's got Ethan Walker wrapped around her finger now. Probably used some kind of witchery. Clara kept her back straight and her eyes forward, refusing to show how much the words stung. Beside her, Ethan rode easy and relaxed, as if he couldn't hear the venom in those whispers. They stopped in front of the territorial bank, and Ethan helped Clara dismount. As they tied their horses to the rail, Harold McCaffrey emerged from the saloon across the street, flanked by 2 of his men. Well, well, McCaffrey called out. If it isn't our little horse thief, surprised to see you still in town, Miss Jennings. Thought you'd have run off by now. I don't run from false accusations, Clara said clearly, her voice carrying down the street. McCaffrey's eyes narrowed. False? My horse was tied behind the mercantile yesterday. You expect people to believe that was just coincidence? I expect people to use their brains, Ethan interjected. If Clara had actually stolen your horse, McCaffrey, why would she tie it behind a public building in the middle of town? Why not ride out immediately? Because she's stupid as well as criminal, one of McCaffrey's men muttered. Watch your mouth, Ethan said softly, but there was steel underneath the quiet words. You're talking about a lady. Lady? McCaffrey laughed. That's Rich Walker. Everyone knows what she is. A drifter, probably a prostitute, definitely trouble. And you're fool enough to shelter her. Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and sharp. She'd heard worse over the past 3 years, had been called every ugly name bitter people could think of. But somehow this felt different. Maybe because Ethan was standing beside her, witnessing her humiliation. Maybe because part of her had hoped Blackwater Creek might be different. Mr. McCaffrey, she said, her voice shaking slightly with suppressed anger. I don't know why you're so determined to destroy me. But I promise you this, I will not be driven out of this town by lies and intimidation. And when the truth comes out about what really happened yesterday, you're going to wish you'd left me alone." McCaffrey's face darkened. "That sounds like a threat, girl." "It's a promise," Clara shot back. For a long moment, the two stared at each other while the whole street watched. Then McCaffrey smiled, a cold, calculating expression that didn't reach his eyes. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't change facts. And the fact is, you're a nobody with no friends, no money, and no future in this territory." He glanced at Ethan. "And you, Walker? You're making a mistake protecting her. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't expect Will Peterson to still have a job for you." "I'll take that risk," Ethan said calmly. McCaffrey shook his head and turned away, his men following. But as he walked back toward the saloon, he called over his shoulder, "You've been warned, both of you. What happens next is on your heads." Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, and she shoved them into her pockets to hide it. "You did good," Ethan said quietly. Standing up to him like that took courage. "Or stupidity," Clara muttered. "He's going to come after us harder now." "Probably, but at least now everyone in town knows we're not backing down." Ethan touched her elbow gently. "Come on, let's see if Abigail can help us." The Territorial Bank was a modest building with thick walls and bars on the windows. Inside it was cool and dim, smelling of paper and ink. A young woman sat at a desk near the back, blonde, pretty, with sharp eyes that took in everything. "Ethan," she said, standing as they approached, "I heard about what happened yesterday. Is this—" "Clara Jennings," Ethan confirmed. "Clara, this is Abigail Thornton, best clerk in the territory and a good friend." Abigail studied Clara for a moment, then extended her hand. "Any enemy of Harold McCaffrey is a friend of mine. What can I do for you?" "We need information," Ethan said, lowering his voice. "Bank records, specifically, on McCaffrey's deposits and land purchases over the past 2 years. Abigail's eyes widened. "Ethan, I can't just hand over customer records. That's illegal. And if the bank manager found out—" "I know what I'm asking," Ethan said, "and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Abigail, McCaffrey tried to frame Clara yesterday because she's connected to something he wants hidden, something that could bring down his whole empire if it came to light." "What kind of something?" Abigail asked warily. Clara made a decision. "My brother was framed for a bank robbery 3 years ago in Colorado. 3 people died, and $50,000 was stolen. The real killers took the money and disappeared. We have reason to believe some of that money ended up in Harold McCaffrey's accounts." Abigail sat down slowly. "That's a serious accusation, which is why we need proof," Ethan said. "Bank records showing deposits that match the timeline and amount. If we can prove McCaffrey's been using stolen money, we can connect him to the robbery and clear Clara's brother." "And what happens to me when McCaffrey finds out I helped you?" Abigail asked. "He'll ruin me, probably have me arrested." "He won't find out," Ethan promised. "We'll be careful with how we use the information. And if everything goes according to plan, McCaffrey will be too busy defending himself to come after anyone else." Abigail looked between them, clearly weighing the risks against her obvious hatred of McCaffrey. Finally, she sighed. "My father lost his farm because of that man. He died last winter, broken and poor, because Harold McCaffrey wanted his water rights." Her voice hardened. "If there's a chance to bring him down, I'll take it, but I need time. The records you want are locked in the vault, and I can only access them when the manager isn't here." "How much time?" Clara asked. 3 days? Maybe 4? The manager's going to Denver next week for a banking conference. I'll have access to the vault for at least 2 days while he's gone." "That's perfect," Ethan said. "Can you make copies?" "I can do better than that. I'll photograph the pages with my father's old camera. Harder to prove where the photos came from if things go sideways." Abigail pulled out a small notebook and started writing. "I'll need to know exactly what dates and amounts you're looking for." They spent the next hour going over details: the date of the Silverton robbery, the approximate amount stolen, the timeline of McCaffrey's land purchases. Abigail took notes in a careful shorthand, asking clarifying questions and suggesting additional records that might prove useful. "One more thing," Ethan said as they prepared to leave. "Do you know anything about Silas McCaffrey? Harold's younger brother? Abigail's expression turned thoughtful. Not much. He was around town about 2 years ago, spent a lot of time in the saloon gambling and drinking. Then he disappeared. Rumor was he went to California, but Harold never talks about him. Did you ever see them together? Clara asked. Harold and Silas? A few times. They'd meet at the saloon or the hotel, always in private rooms. Harold seemed nervous around Silas, like he was afraid of him, or maybe afraid of what Silas knew. Abigail looked up. You think Silas is involved in the robbery? We know he is, Ethan said grimly, which means Harold's been protecting him. That's leverage we can use if we need it. They left the bank as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. Clara felt exhausted, emotionally wrung out from the confrontation with McCaffrey and the careful plotting with Abigail. We should get back to the ranch, Ethan said. Will's probably worried, and we need to fill him in on what Abigail said. But as they mounted their horses, a commotion erupted at the far end of town, shouting, the sound of breaking glass, and then a gunshot cracked through the air. People scattered, ducking into shops and alleyways. What the hell? Ethan muttered, spurring his horse forward. Clara followed, her heart hammering. They rounded the corner by the livery stable and saw a knot of men surrounding someone on the ground. As they pushed through the crowd, Clara's blood turned to ice. Luke lay in the dirt, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his hands raised defensively as 3 of McCaffrey's men stood over him with drawn guns. No! Clara screamed, leaping from her horse and running toward her brother. Ethan was faster, putting himself between Luke and the armed men. What the hell do you think you're doing? Collecting a bounty? One of the men said, grinning. This here's Luke Jennings, wanted for bank robbery and murder. $300, dead or alive. That's not... Clara started, but Ethan cut her off with a sharp gesture. You've got the wrong man, Ethan said coldly. This is Luke Martin, one of Will Peterson's ranch hands. He's been working at the Double W for 2 months. Funny how he looks exactly like the man on this wanted poster, another man said, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. Same age, same description, same scar on his left hand. Clara's mind raced. Luke must have come into town looking for her, worried when she didn't return immediately, and somehow McCaffrey's men had recognized him. Sheriff Briggs pushed through the crowd, his expression grim. What's going on here? We caught Luke Jennings, Sheriff, the first man said eagerly. The wanted outlaw. We're claiming the bounty. Briggs looked at Luke, then at Ethan, then at Clara. His face was unreadable. That true? This is Luke Jennings? No, Ethan said firmly. This is Luke Martin. He's been working at the Double W since August. I can vouch for him. Can you now? McCaffrey's voice cut through the crowd as he appeared, his expression triumphant. Seems like you vouch for a lot of criminals, Walker. First the horse thief, now a wanted murderer. Makes a man wonder what else you're hiding out at Peterson's ranch. The crowd murmured, pressing closer. Clara saw the calculation in McCaffrey's eyes, the way he was working the mob. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. Proof that the Double W was harboring outlaws, leverage to force Will to sell. Sheriff, Clara said desperately, this is a mistake. My brother is innocent. He was framed for... Your brother, Briggs interrupted. So you admit this is Luke Jennings? Clara froze, realizing her mistake. In her panic, she'd given McCaffrey exactly what he needed. Well, well, McCaffrey said softly. So the horse thief is the murderer's sister. How convenient. Sheriff, I believe you have probable cause to arrest both of them. Briggs hesitated, clearly unhappy with how this was playing out. But the law was the law, and Luke's identity was no longer in question. Luke Jennings, Briggs said heavily, you're under arrest for bank robbery and murder. Clara Jennings, you're under arrest as an accessory after the fact. No, Ethan stepped forward. Sheriff, you can't... Stay back, Walker, Briggs warned. Unless you want to join them in a cell. I like you, but I won't have you interfering with a legal arrest. Clara felt hands grab her arms, dragging her toward the jail. She struggled, but it was useless. Beside her, Luke wasn't resisting. He looked defeated, broken, like a man who'd always known this moment would come. Ethan, Clara called out desperately. Tell Will. Tell him. I'll fix this, Ethan promised, his voice rough with emotion. Clara, I swear to you, I'll fix this. But as the jail door slammed shut behind them, as Clara and Luke were shoved into separate cells and the key turned in the lock, she couldn't see how anyone could fix this. They'd been so careful, so clever with their planning. And in one impulsive moment, Luke coming to town, Clara calling him her brother, they'd handed McCaffrey everything he needed to destroy them. Through the barred window, Clara could see the sun sinking toward the mountains, painting the sky blood red. It felt like an omen. In the cell next to hers, she heard Luke start to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs of a man who'd tried so hard to protect his sister and had only managed to condemn her instead. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "Clara, I'm so sorry. I should never have come to town. I should have stayed hidden. I've ruined everything." Clara pressed her face against the bars separating their cells, reaching through to take his hand. "Stop it. We're going to get through this." "How?" Luke demanded bitterly. "They've got us both now. You'll hang as my accomplice, and I'll hang for crimes I didn't commit. And McCaffrey wins." Clara wanted to argue, to offer hope and reassurance, but the words stuck in her throat because Luke was right. They'd lost. After everything they'd survived, after all the running and fighting and desperate planning, they'd lost. Outside, she could hear McCaffrey's voice raised in triumph, rallying the townspeople. "This is what happens when good people let criminals hide among them. The Double W Ranch has been harboring outlaws, and Will Peterson needs to answer for it." The crowd roared its approval, and Clara realized with sinking horror that McCaffrey wasn't done. He was going to use this to go after Will and Ethan, to destroy the ranch and everyone associated with it. Hours passed. The light faded from the window and the jail grew dark and cold. Outside, Ethan's voice, urgent and pleading, trying to convince the sheriff to release them. "I can't, Walker," Briggs said. "Even if I wanted to. Luke Jennings has a federal warrant. That's out of my jurisdiction. He'll be transferred to Colorado within the week, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." "And Clara?" "She admitted to being his sister. That makes her an accessory at minimum. I have to hold her until the federal marshal arrives and decides what charges to file." "She hasn't done anything wrong." Ethan's voice cracked with frustration. "Maybe not, but that's for a judge to decide, not me." Clara heard Ethan's boots on the wooden boards as he paced. "Can I see her? Just for a minute?" A long pause. Then Briggs sighed. 5 minutes, that's all." The door to the cell block opened and Ethan appeared in the lamplight. He looked haggard, his face drawn with worry and anger. When he saw Clara pressed against the bars, his expression crumpled. "I'm going to fix this," he said immediately. "Clara, I promise you." "You can't," Clara interrupted gently. "Ethan, it's over. McCaffrey's won. Luke and I are going to hang, and there's nothing anyone can do about it." "No." Ethan grabbed the bars, his knuckles white. "I won't accept that. We'll get proof of the frame-up. We'll find Jack Reeves and Cole Brennan. We'll force them to confess." "In a week?" Clara asked. "Because that's how long we have before Luke gets transferred. And even if we somehow found them and got a confession, do you really think it would matter? McCaffrey owns the law out here. He'll bury any evidence that doesn't support his version of events." "Then we run," Ethan said desperately. "I'll break you out tonight. We'll take Luke and head for Canada or Mexico or anywhere they can't find us." "And make you an outlaw too?" Clara shook her head. "No, I won't let you throw away your life for me." "My life doesn't mean anything if I can't save you." Ethan's voice was raw with emotion. "Clara, when I saw you in that street yesterday, when I lied to save you, something changed in me. I told you I'd been looking for purpose, for a reason God spared me in that blizzard. You're that reason. Saving you, protecting you, fighting for you. That's what I'm meant to do. So don't ask me to just let you hang. I can't. I won't." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Ethan said fiercely. "I know you're brave and stubborn, and you've survived 3 years of hell. I know you love your brother enough to sacrifice everything for him. I know you deserve better than to die for crimes you didn't commit." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And I know that in 2 days I've come to care about you more than I have any right to." Clara reached through the bars and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "Ethan." "Time's up, Walker," Briggs called from the outer office. "1 more minute." Ethan called back without taking his eyes off Clara. Please. Briggs sighed but didn't argue. Listen to me, Ethan said urgently. Will is calling in every favor he has. He's sending telegrams to judges, lawyers, anyone who might help. And Abigail is going to get those bank records regardless of how long it takes. We're going to prove McCaffrey's connection to the robbery, and we're going to clear Luke's name. In time to save us? Clara asked. In time, Ethan promised. You have to trust me, Clara. Can you do that? Clara wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that somehow, impossibly, they could still win this. But hope was a dangerous thing. It made you vulnerable, made the eventual fall hurt that much worse. I want to, she said finally. God help me, Ethan. I want to trust you. Then do, Ethan said simply. And I swear on everything I hold sacred, I won't let you down. He leaned close then, pressing his forehead against the bars that separated them. Clara mirrored him, and for a heartbeat they stayed like that, close enough to breathe each other's air, close enough to feel the heat between them, but separated by iron and circumstance and the weight of impossible odds. Walker, Briggs called again. Now, or I'm having you removed. Ethan pulled back reluctantly. 3 days, he said. That's all I need. 3 days to prove your innocence. And if you can't? Clara asked. Ethan's jaw set with determination. Then I'm breaking you out and we're running, together. He turned and walked out before Clara could protest, before she could tell him that she wouldn't let him sacrifice everything for her. The door closed, leaving her alone in the darkness, with only Luke's quiet weeping and the distant sounds of McCaffrey celebrating his victory. Clara slid down to sit on the cold floor of her cell, wrapping her arms around her knees. She'd been in tight spots before, had faced down angry mobs and corrupt lawmen and the endless grinding poverty of being unwanted wherever she went. But this felt different. This felt final. In the cell beside hers, Luke had gone quiet. After a long moment, he spoke. He loves you, you know. That cowboy. I can hear it in his voice. Don't be ridiculous, Clara said. He barely knows me. Some things don't require time, Luke said softly. Some things just are. And Clara? If anyone can save us, it's him. He's got the look of a man who doesn't know how to quit. Clara didn't answer. She just sat there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Blackwater Creek settling down for the night, and tried very hard not to hope. Because hope, she'd learned, was the cruelest thing of all. The first night in jail was the longest of Clara's life. She dozed fitfully on the hard wooden bench that served as a bed, jolting awake at every sound. Boots on the boardwalk outside, distant laughter from the saloon, the creak of the building settling in the cold. Each time she woke, reality crashed over her again like a wave, trapped, helpless, waiting for a noose. By the time gray dawnlight filtered through the barred window, Clara had given up trying to sleep. She sat with her back against the cold stone wall, watching dust motes dance in the pale sunlight and listening to Luke's ragged breathing in the next cell. Her brother had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep somewhere near midnight, and she was grateful he'd found at least temporary escape from their nightmare. The outer door opened, and Sheriff Briggs entered carrying a tray with coffee and biscuits. He set it down on the desk without looking at either of them, his weathered face creased with what might have been guilt or simply exhaustion. Eat something, he said gruffly, sliding tin plates through the slot at the bottom of each cell door. Federal marshals expected tomorrow or the day after. You'll need your strength. Clara took the plate mechanically but couldn't bring herself to eat. Sheriff, please. If you just listen to what really happened in Silverton, it's not my place to listen, Briggs interrupted, but his tone was gentler than his words. I'm territorial law, Miss Jennings. Your brother's got a federal warrant. Even if I believed every word you said, I couldn't do anything about it. You could give us time, Clara pressed. Let people investigate before the marshal comes. Time for what? So that cowboy of yours can cook up more lies? Briggs shook his head. I like Ethan Walker. I do. But he's in over his head protecting you two, and it's going to get him hurt or worse. Then let me go, Clara said desperately. I'll leave town, disappear. Luke's the one they want. There's no reason to keep me. Except you admitted to being his sister, to knowing he was alive when everyone thought he was dead. Briggs poured himself coffee, not meeting her eyes. That makes you an accessory in the eyes of the law. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied. In the next cell, Luke stirred and sat up slowly, wincing at some injury Clara couldn't see. "Sheriff's right, Clara," he said hoarsely. "This isn't on him. It's on me. It's always been on me." Briggs glanced at Luke with an expression that might have been pity. "For what it's worth, son, I've been a lawman 30 years. I've got a sense for when someone's lying, and when you say you didn't commit those murders, I believe you. But belief isn't evidence, and without evidence, there's nothing I can do." "What if we got evidence?" Clara asked. "What if we could prove Luke was framed?" "Then you'd take it to a judge in Colorado where the crimes occurred," Briggs said. "But you'd need real proof, not just stories. Confessions from the actual killers, or bank records showing stolen money, or witnesses who saw what really happened." He set down his coffee cup. "And you'd need it before that marshal arrives, which gives you maybe 48 hours. "So you're saying there's a chance," Clara said, latching on to that thin thread of hope. "I'm saying the law allows for new evidence," Briggs corrected carefully. "I'm not saying I expect any to materialize. Harold McCaffrey's been celebrating all night at the saloon, telling everyone how he helped catch a dangerous criminal. He's got the whole town believing you're both guilty as sin." "Of course he does," Luke said bitterly, "because if we hang, his secret stays buried." Briggs frowned. "What secret?" Clara and Luke exchanged glances. They'd been so careful not to reveal McCaffrey's connection to the robbery, knowing that without proof, accusations would only make things worse. But what did they have to lose now? "The men who actually robbed that bank and killed those people," Clara said slowly. "One of them was Silas McCaffrey, Harold's younger brother." The sheriff went very still. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth," Luke said. "Silas was calling himself Silas Finch back then, but it was him. I recognized him from a photograph Will Peterson showed me. Harold and Silas together at some cattle auction 5 years ago." Briggs was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. "If what you're saying is true, then Harold's been harboring a fugitive, using stolen money for his land purchases. Which is why he's so desperate to see us hang," Clara said. "Dead men can't testify." The sheriff rubbed his face tiredly. "Even if I believed you, and I'm not saying I do, I couldn't investigate Harold McCaffrey without proof. He's got too much power in this territory. I'd be drummed out of office, or worse." "So we're supposed to just accept that we're going to die protecting a corrupt rancher?" Clara demanded. "I'm supposed to uphold the law, as I understand it," Briggs said firmly. "And right now, the law says Luke Jennings is wanted for murder. Everything else is speculation." He moved toward the door, then paused. "But Miss Jennings? If someone were to bring me real evidence of McCaffrey's involvement, evidence that would hold up in court, I'd be duty-bound to investigate, no matter how powerful he is." It was as close to encouragement as they were going to get. The door closed behind him, leaving Clara and Luke alone again with the weight of impossible expectations. 48 hours, Luke said. "That's not enough time to find Jack and Cole, let alone make them confess." "No," Clara agreed. "But it might be enough time to get those bank records. If Abigail can access the vault today instead of waiting for the manager's trip to Denver." "That's still just financial evidence," Luke interrupted. "It proves McCaffrey had unexplained money, but it doesn't prove where it came from or that Silas was involved in the robbery." Clara pressed her hands against her eyes, fighting despair. Luke was right. They needed more than bank records. They needed a confession, a witness, something that definitively connected the Silverton robbery to Silas McCaffrey. The morning dragged on with agonizing slowness. Clara heard the town coming to life outside, wagons rattling past, shopkeepers opening for business, children laughing on their way to school. Normal life continuing while she and Luke sat in cells waiting for death. Around midday, the outer door opened again, and Clara's heart leaped at the sound of familiar voices. Ethan and Will pushed past the deputy's weak protests, both men looking like they hadn't slept. 5 minutes, the deputy warned. "Sheriff's orders." Ethan came straight to Clara's cell, his hands gripping the bars. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight with barely controlled emotion. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," Clara admitted. "Did you—" "We've been working all night," Will interrupted, positioning himself where he could see both Clara and Luke. "Sent telegrams to every contact I have in Colorado, Wyoming, even up in Dakota Territory. Asked about Jack Reeves and Cole Brennan, anyone matching their descriptions. And? Luke asked urgently. Will's expression was grim. Nothing solid yet. A few possible sightings from months ago, but nothing recent. These men know how to disappear. Clara felt hope crumbling. So we're back to the bank records. Abigail's working on it, Ethan said. She's taking a huge risk, but she's determined to help. She's going to access the vault tonight when the bank's closed and the manager's asleep. That's still just financial evidence, Clara said, echoing Luke's earlier concern. It's not enough to prove Luke's innocence. It's a start, Ethan insisted. And while Abigail works on that, I'm going to ride to Silverton myself. There has to be someone there who remembers that night, someone who saw something that didn't make it into the official reports. Silverton's 2 days' ride from here, Luke protested. You'll never make it there and back before the marshal arrives. Then I'll ride hard and sleep light, Ethan said flatly. I'm not giving up, Luke. Not on you, not on Clara, not on justice. Clara felt tears threatening again. Ethan, you can't. I can and I will, he said fiercely. Clara, I told you I'd fix this. I meant it. Time's up, the deputy called from the outer office. 1 more minute, Ethan called back, then lowered his voice. Clara, I need you to hold on. Just hold on for 3 more days. Can you do that? Clara wanted to tell him it was hopeless, that he was chasing shadows while their execution drew closer. But looking into his eyes, seeing the absolute conviction there, the refusal to accept defeat, she found herself nodding. 3 days, she whispered. Ethan reached through the bars and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. When this is over, when you're free, I'm going to ask you something important, and I need you to be alive to answer. Before Clara could respond, the deputy appeared and physically pulled Ethan away from the cell. Out, both of you. Sheriff said 5 minutes, and I meant it. Will squeezed Luke's shoulder through the bars. Stay strong, son. We're not done fighting yet. Then they were gone, leaving Clara with the imprint of Ethan's hand still warm on hers, and questions she couldn't begin to answer burning in her mind. He's going to get himself killed, Luke said quietly. Riding to Silverton alone, asking questions about a 3-year-old robbery. If any of McCaffrey's people find out what he's doing. I know, Clara said, but we can't stop him. Would you want to? Luke asked. Stop him, I mean, if you could. Clara thought about that. No, she admitted, because he's the only hope we have. Him and Will and Abigail. They're the only ones fighting for us. He's fighting for you, Luke corrected gently. I'm just the brother who comes with the package. Don't say that. It's true, though. You see the way he looks at you? That's not a man trying to clear an innocent person's name. That's a man in love. Clara's breath caught. That's ridiculous. He's known me for 2 days. Sometimes 2 days is enough, Luke said. Ma used to say she knew she'd marry Pa the first time she saw him. Took one look across a church social and just knew. His voice turned wistful. I always thought she was exaggerating. But watching Ethan with you, I think maybe Ma was right. Sometimes you just know. Clara didn't trust herself to respond. Instead, she retreated to her bench and tried to find some comfortable position on the hard wood. Outside, she heard a commotion. Raised voices, the sound of horses galloping into town. Then Harold McCaffrey's voice, loud and triumphant. Briggs, Sheriff Briggs, get out here! The sheriff emerged from his office, and Clara pressed her face against the bars to see what was happening. Through the window, she could just make out McCaffrey on his black stallion, surrounded by a half-dozen armed men. He was holding something, a piece of paper that he waved in the air like a trophy. What is it, McCaffrey? Briggs asked wearily. Telegraph from the federal marshal in Cheyenne, McCaffrey announced loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. He's sending a man to collect the prisoners. Should arrive tomorrow evening instead of the day after. Seems news of Luke Jennings' capture has generated quite a bit of interest in the territory. Clara's stomach dropped. Tomorrow evening. That gave them less than 30 hours, not 48. Also got some interesting news from Colorado, McCaffrey continued. Turns out there's a reward for information leading to the recovery of that stolen money. $10,000 to anyone who can help locate it. His eyes glinted with malice. Makes a man wonder if the Jennings siblings might be more talkative if they knew they could buy their freedom with the right information. We don't have the money, Luke shouted from his cell. How many times do we have to tell you? That's what they all say, McCaffrey replied. But I'm a patient man. You've got until the marshal arrives to remember where you hid it. Otherwise, you're both going back to Colorado to hang. He wheeled his horse around. Sheriff, I'm posting men outside the jail, just to make sure nobody tries anything stupid like a jailbreak. Briggs's jaw tightened. This is my jail, McCaffrey. I don't need your men. Consider it a courtesy, McCaffrey interrupted smoothly. After all, Luke Jennings is a dangerous criminal. Can't be too careful. He gestured to his men, and 3 of them dismounted and positioned themselves around the jail entrance. As McCaffrey rode off, Briggs turned back to the jail with murder in his eyes. That son of a... He caught himself glancing at Clara through the bars. I apologize for the language, miss, but Harold McCaffrey is making a mockery of territorial law, and I'm about ready to... To what? Clara asked quietly. You said yourself he's too powerful to touch without evidence. Briggs didn't answer, just stalked back into his office and slammed the door. Clara slumped against the wall, trying to process this new timeline. Tomorrow evening, less than 30 hours. Ethan wouldn't even make it to Silverton by then, let alone find evidence and get back. And Abigail couldn't access the vault until tonight at the earliest. They'd run out of time before they'd really begun. Clara, Luke said softly, listen to me. When the marshal comes, I want you to tell him you didn't know I was alive. Tell him you only found out yesterday, that you were as shocked as anyone. I won't lie to save myself while you hang. You have to, Luke insisted. Clara, you've got your whole life ahead of you. You're young, smart, capable. You could build a real life somewhere, away from all this, away from me. Stop it, Clara said fiercely. I'm not abandoning you, Luke. We're in this together. We don't have to be, Luke said desperately. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You can still get out of this. Just tell them I forced you to help me, that you were afraid of me. They'll believe it. I would never... Then do it for Ethan. Luke's voice cracked. Do it for that cowboy who's willing to throw his whole life away to save you. Give him something to fight for that's actually worth the risk. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. You're worth the risk, you idiot. You're my brother. You're my family. I'm a dead man walking, Luke said flatly, but you don't have to be. Before Clara could argue further, commotion erupted outside. Shouting, the sound of a struggle, and then gunfire. 3 sharp cracks that made Clara's heart stop. She pressed against the bars, trying to see what was happening. Through the window, she glimpsed figures fighting in the street. McCaffrey's guards had their guns drawn, pointing at someone Clara couldn't quite see. Nobody move, one of the guards shouted. Drop your weapons, or we shoot. Like hell, came a familiar voice. Ethan's voice, rough with fury. You've got no authority to hold this jail. Stand down or I'll make you. You're outnumbered, Walker, another guard called. 3-1. Even you aren't that stupid. Want to bet? More gunfire and Clara screamed Ethan's name. In the outer office, Sheriff Briggs grabbed his rifle and ran outside. Through the window, Clara watched the chaos unfold like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Ethan stood in the middle of the street with his gun drawn, facing off against McCaffrey's 3 guards. Will Peterson was beside him, also armed. And behind them stood a dozen men Clara recognized as ranch hands from the Double W and neighboring spreads. This ends now, McCaffrey, Ethan called out, his voice carrying down the street. You're going to call off your dogs and let the law handle this properly. McCaffrey emerged from the saloon, flanked by more armed men. The whole town seemed to be gathering, drawn by the sound of gunfire and the promise of violence. You're making a mistake, Walker, McCaffrey said coldly. These men are deputized to guard dangerous criminals. Interfering with them is a crime. Deputized by who? Ethan demanded. You're not the law, McCaffrey. You're just a corrupt rancher trying to cover up your brother's crimes. The street went silent. Every eye turned to McCaffrey, whose face had gone dangerously red. That's slander, he said quietly. I could have you arrested just for saying it. Then arrest me, Ethan challenged. But first, let's talk about Silas. Let's talk about where he was 3 years ago. Let's talk about $50,000 in stolen money and 3 innocent people dead. You don't know what you're talking about. I know your brother was calling himself Silas Finch in Colorado. I know he was part of the gang that robbed the Silverton Bank, and I know you've been using that stolen money to buy up half the territory." Ethan's voice rang with conviction. "Luke Jennings is innocent, and you've been protecting the real killers." The crowd murmured, uncertain. Clara could see doubt creeping into their faces, questions forming where there had been only judgment before. McCaffrey's hand moved toward his gun. "You've got no proof of any of that." "Not yet," Ethan admitted, "but I will, and when I do, you're going to wish you'd left the Jennings siblings alone." "They'll be dead before you find any proof," McCaffrey shot back. "Marshall's coming tomorrow evening, and they're both going to hang. Nothing you can do will stop that." "We'll see," Ethan said softly. Then louder, addressing the whole street. "I'm asking everyone here to think about what's happening. A woman and her brother are about to be executed based on 3-year-old charges that might not even be true. Harold McCaffrey is pushing for this execution awfully hard, and he's put armed guards on the jail to make sure nobody asks too many questions. Why? What's he afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of anything," McCaffrey snarled. "I'm a law-abiding citizen ensuring justice is served." "Then you won't mind if we investigate your brother's whereabouts 3 years ago," Ethan said. "You won't mind if we examine your bank records and land purchases. You won't mind if we ask Silas some questions about the Silverton robbery." "My brother is in California," McCaffrey said tightly, "and my finances are none of your damn business." "Funny thing," Will interjected. "I've got telegrams from 3 different people who saw someone matching Silas's description in various towns across the territories over the past 2 years. Cheyenne, Denver, Santa Fe. Never in California, though. Almost like he's been hiding somewhere close to home." McCaffrey's composure cracked. "You're both going to regret this. When those criminals hang tomorrow, everyone's going to remember that you defended them, that you lied for them. Your reputations will be destroyed." "I'd rather lose my reputation than my soul," Ethan said quietly. "Can you say the same, McCaffrey?" For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the dusty street, and Clara could feel the violence simmering in the air. One wrong move, one hot head, and blood would spill in front of the whole town. Then Sheriff Briggs stepped between them, his rifle held across his chest. "That's enough. Everyone stand down before somebody gets killed." "The guards stay," McCaffrey insisted. "No, they don't," Briggs said firmly. "I'm the law here, not you. I'll guard my own prisoners, and I won't have armed thugs turning my jail into a fortress." He turned to McCaffrey's men. "You're dismissed. Go home." The guards looked at McCaffrey, waiting for orders. The rancher's face was purple with rage, but he must have recognized he was losing the crowd's support because he finally nodded sharply. "Fine. But if those prisoners escape, Sheriff, it's on your head." "They won't escape," Briggs said. "They'll stay locked up until the marshal arrives, and then the law will take its course. That's how this works, McCaffrey, not with private armies and threats." McCaffrey spun on his heel and stalked back toward the saloon, his remaining men following. The crowd began to disperse, though Clara could hear them talking in low, urgent voices about what Ethan had said, about Silas McCaffrey and stolen money and doubts that hadn't existed an hour ago. Ethan holstered his gun and turned toward the jail. Through the window, his eyes found Clara's, and the relief in his expression made her want to cry. But the relief was short-lived because Briggs blocked his path. "That was stupid, Walker," the sheriff said quietly. "Accusing Harold McCaffrey in front of the whole town without a shred of evidence. You've made an enemy you can't afford." "I already had that enemy," Ethan replied. "At least now people are asking questions." "Questions don't free prisoners," Briggs pointed out. "You've got until tomorrow evening to find actual proof, or Luke and Clara Jennings are going back to Colorado in chains. And if you interfere with that transfer, I will arrest you. I like you, Ethan, but I won't let you turn this into a bloodbath." Ethan nodded slowly. "Understood. Can I see her?" Briggs hesitated, then sighed. 2 minutes. "And Walker? If you're planning something stupid like a jailbreak, remember that I've got deputies who'll shoot first and ask questions later." "No jailbreak," Ethan promised. "I'm going to prove their innocence the right way." Briggs stepped aside and Ethan entered the cell block. He looked exhausted, his clothes dusty from hard riding, a fresh bruise darkening his jaw. But his eyes were fierce with determination. "Are you all right?" Claire asked. "I heard gunshots." Warning shots from McCaffrey's idiots, Ethan said dismissively. Nobody got hurt. But Clara, we're running out of time. The marshal's coming tomorrow evening. I know. We heard. Clara gripped the bars. Ethan, you can't ride to Silverton now. There's not enough time. I'm not going to Silverton, Ethan said. I've got a better idea. McCaffrey mentioned his brothers in California, but Will's telegrams suggest otherwise. I think Silas is still in the territory, probably close enough that Harold can keep an eye on him. So what are you going to do? Find him, Ethan said simply. Find Silas McCaffrey and make him tell the truth about what happened in Silverton. That's insane, Luke said from his cell. Even if you find him, he'll never confess. Why would he? Because I'm going to offer him something he wants more than his freedom, Ethan said. I'm going to offer him his brother. Clara stared at him. What? Harold's been using stolen money to build his empire, Ethan explained rapidly. That makes him just as guilty as Silas in the eyes of the law. If I can prove that connection, I can offer Silas a deal. Testify against the men who actually killed those people in exchange for a reduced sentence. Turn evidence against his brother in exchange for his own life. That's manipulative, Clara said. That's justice, Ethan corrected. And it's the only chance we have. Will's heading to the bank to meet Abigail, see if she got those records. I'm riding out to search every line shack, abandoned cabin, and hidden canyon within a day's ride. Silas has to be somewhere close. Time's up, Briggs called from outside. Ethan reached through the bars and cupped Clara's face in his calloused hand. Hold on, he said fiercely. Just hold on a little longer. Ethan, what you said earlier about asking me something when this is over. Later, he interrupted gently. When you're free and this nightmare is behind us. That's when I'll ask. And I need you to be alive to answer, Clara. You understand me? I need you to fight with everything you have to stay alive until I can get you out of here. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan's thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden boards as he left. Clara heard him talking urgently to Will outside, making plans, coordinating their desperate search. And then the sound of hoofbeats, as multiple riders headed out in different directions. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara paced her small cell, trying to calculate distances and timelines. Even if Ethan found Silas immediately, he'd still need to get a confession, get back to town, and convince Briggs to hold the marshal until they could present new evidence. It was a series of impossible tasks connected by hope and desperation. As evening shadows lengthened across the cell, the outer door opened again. Clara expected the deputy with their evening meal, but instead a woman's voice called out hesitantly. Hello? Is anyone here? Briggs emerged from his office. Bank's closed, Miss Thornton. What can I do for you? Clara's heart leaped. Abigail. I need to speak with you, Sheriff, Abigail said, her voice shaking slightly. It's urgent. About Harold McCaffrey. Clara pressed against the bars, straining to hear. In the outer office, she saw Abigail hand the sheriff a thick envelope. What's this? Briggs asked. Bank records, Abigail said. McCaffrey's accounts for the past 3 years. I know I'm breaking about a dozen laws by giving them to you, and I know I'll probably lose my position. But Sheriff, you need to see these. You need to see where his money came from. Briggs opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in neat columns of figures. His expression grew darker as he read. These show large cash deposits starting about 2.5 years ago, Abigail explained. $50,000 in total, deposited in irregular amounts over the course of 6 months. No documented source, no explanation in the records. Could be legitimate business income, Briggs said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sheriff, Harold McCaffrey's ranch was mortgaged to the hilt 3 years ago. He was about to lose everything. Then suddenly he has $50,000 in cash to deposit, cash that appears right around the time of the Silverton robbery. Abigail's voice strengthened. And look at the dates of his land purchases. They all correspond to these deposits. He's been using that money to buy up the territory. Briggs set the papers down slowly. Miss Thornton, you understand what you're saying? You're accusing one of the most powerful men in Montana Territory of being an accessory to murder and robbery. I know, Abigail said, and I'm prepared to testify to the authenticity of these records in court if necessary. But Sheriff, two people are about to be executed tomorrow for crimes they might not have committed. Doesn't that matter more than protecting Harold McCaffrey's reputation? Clara wanted to cheer. Abigail had done it. She'd gotten the evidence, risked everything to bring truth to light. But as she watched Briggs's face, she realized the sheriff was caught between competing obligations. This is compelling evidence, he admitted. But it's not proof of innocence for Luke Jennings. At best, it suggests McCaffrey has unexplained income. It doesn't prove where that money came from or that Luke didn't commit those murders. But it raises reasonable doubt, Abigail argued. Isn't that enough to delay the transfer until a proper investigation can be conducted? I don't have authority to delay a federal warrant, Briggs said heavily. The marshal's coming tomorrow, and unless I have concrete proof that Luke Jennings is innocent, I'm legally obligated to turn him over. Then what good is any of this? Abigail demanded, her voice breaking. What good is evidence if it doesn't change anything? Briggs was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at Abigail with something like respect in his tired eyes. It changes the conversation, he said finally, and sometimes that's enough. Miss Thornton, you've given me justification to open an investigation into Harold McCaffrey's finances. I can't free the Jennings siblings, but I can make sure McCaffrey's activities get proper scrutiny. After they're dead, Abigail said bitterly. Maybe, Briggs acknowledged. Or maybe Ethan Walker finds what he's looking for in time. You've given him a weapon to use, Miss Thornton, evidence that backs up his accusations. That's worth something. Abigail left shortly after, her shoulders slumped with disappointment. Clara understood the feeling. They'd gotten the bank records they needed, but it wasn't enough. Without Silas's confession, without concrete proof connecting the stolen money to the Silverton robbery, the evidence was just suggestive, compelling, but not conclusive. Night fell, and with it came a cold that seeped through the stone walls of the jail. Clara wrapped herself in the thin blanket the deputy had provided and tried not to think about how few hours remained. Somewhere out there, Ethan was searching for a man who might not exist, chasing a confession that might never come. And tomorrow evening, a federal marshal would arrive to take them to their execution. Clara, Luke said softly into the darkness, if this doesn't work out, if tomorrow comes and Ethan hasn't found what he needs, I want you to know something. Don't, Clara said. Don't say goodbye. We're not done fighting yet. Just listen, Luke insisted. I need you to know that you were the best sister anyone could have asked for. You stood by me when you had every right to walk away. You suffered because of my mistakes, and you never once blamed me for it. Of course I blamed you, Clara said, trying to lighten the moment. I blamed you constantly. Luke laughed softly. Okay, you blamed me. But you never abandoned me. And Clara, if I hang tomorrow, I want you to promise me something. Luke, promise me you'll let yourself be happy, he said urgently. Promise me you'll accept whatever Ethan wants to offer you, that Cowboy loves you, and you deserve to be loved like that. You deserve a life that isn't defined by my mistakes. Clara felt tears streaming down her face again. I can't promise that if you're dead. Yes, you can, Luke said fiercely. You can, and you will. Because I'm not going to let my death ruin your life, the way my mistakes ruined your past. Promise me, Clara. I promise, she whispered, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. They fell silent after that, each alone with their thoughts and fears. Clara dozed fitfully, waking with every sound, hoping to hear Ethan's voice announcing he'd found Silas. He had a confession, everything would be all right. But the night passed in cold silence, broken only by the distant howl of coyotes and the measured tread of the deputy making his rounds. When gray dawn light finally crept through the window, Clara realized they'd run out of time. Today was the day the marshal would arrive. Today was the day their fate would be sealed, and Ethan still hadn't returned. The morning brought a flurry of activity. Sheriff Briggs arrived early, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. The deputy made breakfast, eggs and bacon that Clara couldn't eat, and brought news that the whole town was talking about Ethan's accusations against McCaffrey. Opinions divided, the deputy said as he collected their plates. Some folks think Walker's just trying to save his girl. Others are starting to wonder if maybe there's something to what he said. McCaffrey's been acting awfully defensive, making threats against anyone who questions him. Has anyone seen Ethan? Clara asked desperately. Or Will Peterson? Peterson's at the bank with Miss Thornton, going through more records, the deputy reported. Walker rode out yesterday afternoon and nobody's seen him since. McCaffrey's got men looking for him, though. Says he's going to press charges for slander if Walker can't produce proof. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Noon came and went. Afternoon shadows began lengthening across the floor of Clara's cell. Still, no word from Ethan. Clara found herself praying, really praying, for the first time since she was a child. She prayed that Ethan would find Silas. She prayed for a miracle, for justice, for one more day to prove their innocence. She prayed that if she had to die, Ethan wouldn't do anything stupid trying to save her. Around 4 o'clock, commotion erupted in the street outside. Horses, shouting, and then someone calling for the sheriff. Clara's heart hammered as she pressed against the bars, trying to see what was happening. "The marshal's here early," the deputy announced, bursting into the cell block. "Rode hard to beat the evening. He's demanding custody of the prisoners within the hour." Clara's vision swam. Too soon. It was too soon. Ethan hadn't had enough time. In the cell beside hers, Luke stood rigid, his face pale. "So that's it then. We're out of time." Before Clara could respond, the outer door burst open, and Will Peterson rushed in, waving papers. Sheriff Briggs, you need to see this." Briggs emerged from his office. "What is it, Peterson?" "Telegraph from Colorado. From the judge who presided over the original investigation into the Silverton robbery." Will's hands shook as he handed over the papers. "I sent him copies of the bank records, told him about the accusations against Silas McCaffrey. He did some investigating on his end, and Sheriff, you need to read this." Briggs scanned the papers, his expression growing more intense with each line. "This says there were witnesses who reported seeing 4 men fleeing the bank that night, not one. But their testimony was suppressed because it contradicted the official narrative." "And look at the next page," Will urged. "Description of one of the men. Matches Silas McCaffrey perfectly. The judge says if we can produce Silas and get him to testify, he'll reopen the case." Hope flared in Clara's chest. "Does that mean—" "It means we might have grounds to delay the transfer," Briggs said slowly. "But only if we can produce Silas McCaffrey and get a sworn statement." "Miss Jennings, where's Ethan? Did he find Silas?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "He rode out yesterday and we haven't heard from him since," Briggs swore under his breath. "The marshal's not going to wait. He'll demand custody and—" He checked his pocket watch. 45 minutes. If Walker's not back by then with Silas in custody, I have to turn you over." "Then we stall," Will said desperately. "Make the marshal wait. Give Ethan more time." "On what grounds?" Briggs demanded. "I can't just refuse to comply with a federal warrant because we're waiting for a cowboy who might have gone on a fool's errand." "You can if you believe new evidence is about to emerge," Will argued. "Sheriff, you've seen the bank records. You've read the judge's telegraph. You know there's reasonable doubt here." Briggs looked torn, his duty to the law warring with his sense of justice. Before he could respond, boots thundered on the boardwalk outside, and the federal marshal entered. A hard-faced man in his 50s with a star pinned to his vest and iron in his eyes. "Sheriff Briggs," he said formally, "I'm U.S. Marshal Thomas Crawford, here to take custody of federal prisoner Luke Jennings. I'll also be taking Clara Jennings as an accessory." "Where are they?" "In the cells," Briggs said slowly. "But, Marshal Crawford, there's been a development. New evidence suggesting—" "I don't care about new evidence," Crawford interrupted. "I have a federal warrant. Those prisoners are coming with me, and they're leaving within the hour." Clara felt the world tilting. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with proof or justice or miracles, but with bureaucratic efficiency and the cold machinery of law. Then, cutting through her despair like a knife through silk, came the sound she'd been praying for all day. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses riding hard into town, and Ethan's voice, hoarse but triumphant. "Sheriff! Marshal! I've got him! I've got Silas McCaffrey!" Clara's heart stopped and then thundered back to life as Ethan's voice rang through the jail. She pressed her face against the bars, straining to see through the narrow window into the street beyond. The sound of multiple horses, men's voices raised in confusion and anger, and then boots hitting the boardwalk in rapid succession. Ethan burst through the door, his face streaked with dust and dried blood. his clothes torn, but his eyes blazing with fierce triumph. Behind him came two ranch hands from the Double W, and between them, hands bound and face dark with fury, was a man who could only be Silas McCaffrey. He was younger than his brother Harold, maybe in his early 40s, with the same cold eyes but a harder edge to his features. A week's worth of beard shadowed his jaw, and his clothes were those of a man who'd been living rough, stained, torn, smelling of whiskey and desperation. "What the hell is this?" Marshall Crawford demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "This," Ethan said, breathing hard, "is Silas McCaffrey, also known as Silas Finch, one of the men who actually robbed the Silverton Bank 3 years ago and murdered 3 innocent people." The jail erupted into chaos. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward, hand on his weapon. Marshall Crawford's eyes narrowed dangerously, and from somewhere outside, Clara heard Harold McCaffrey's voice roaring in rage. "You're insane, Walker," Silas snarled, struggling against his bonds. "I don't know what lies this bastard told you, but I had nothing to do with any bank robbery." "Then explain why you were hiding in an abandoned line shack 30 miles from here," Ethan shot back. "Explain why you ran when you saw me coming. Explain why you had this hidden under your bunk." He pulled a leather saddlebag from his shoulder and dumped its contents onto Sheriff Briggs's desk. Money spilled out. Bundles of bills, gold coins, more cash than most people in Blackwater Creek would see in a lifetime. And underneath the money, Clara saw something that made her breath catch. A wanted poster for Luke Jennings. "Found that tacked to the wall of his shack," Ethan said grimly, along with maps of the territory and notes about where Luke might be hiding. Silas has been tracking him, trying to make sure Luke never surfaces to tell his side of the story. "That proves nothing," Silas spat. "I heard there was a reward for information about Jennings. I was trying to collect it, that's all." "Then why hide in the mountains?" Ethan demanded. "Why run from your own brother's ranch to live like an animal in the wilderness?" "Because Harold and I had a falling out," Silas said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "Family business, nothing criminal." Marshall Crawford had been studying Silas intently during this exchange. Now he stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "I remember the Silverton case. 3 dead, including a bank manager and 2 customers. Witnesses reported 4 men involved, but we only ever found evidence of one, Luke Jennings, the inside man." He looked at Silas. "You matched the description given by one of those witnesses. Height, build, distinctive scar on your left cheekbone." Silas's hand moved reflexively toward the scar before he caught himself. "Lots of men have scars. Not combined with the rest of the physical description," Crawford said, "and not combined with unexplained wealth and a wanted poster for the only man who could identify you." He turned to Briggs. "Sheriff, I'm taking this man into custody for questioning about the Silverton robbery." "The hell you are!" Harold McCaffrey's voice boomed as he shoved through the door, flanked by 4 of his men. His face was purple with rage, his eyes wild. "That's my brother you're manhandling, and I won't stand for it." "Harold," Silas started, but his brother cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Shut up. Don't say another word." Harold turned on Ethan with murder in his eyes. "You've crossed a line, Walker. Kidnapping, assault, breaking into private property. I'll see you hang for this." "I didn't kidnap anyone," Ethan said calmly, though Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "I found a wanted fugitive and brought him to the authorities. That's not kidnapping. That's citizen's arrest." "Wanted fugitive?" Harold's laugh was ugly. "You've got no proof my brother is wanted for anything." "Actually, he does," Marshall Crawford interjected. He'd been examining the wanted poster Ethan had found, comparing it to Silas's features. "The description matches, and Mr. McCaffrey," he addressed Harold directly. "If your brother is innocent, he has nothing to fear from questioning. But his presence here, combined with the evidence Mr. Walker discovered, gives me probable cause to detain him while I investigate." "This is a setup," Harold roared. "Walker planted that money, planted that poster. He's trying to frame my brother to save his criminal girlfriend." "That's an interesting theory," Will Peterson said, stepping forward from where he'd been standing quietly in the corner. "Except for one problem. The money in that saddlebag? I've been comparing the serial numbers to records from the Silverton Bank." He held up a piece of paper. Got the list wired from Colorado this morning. At least 10 of those bills matched the serial numbers of money stolen in that robbery. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara watched Harold's face cycle through emotions, rage, fear, calculation. She saw the moment he realized he was trapped, that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling around him. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "How would my brother have money from that robbery unless someone planted it there to frame him? Or unless he was actually involved in the robbery," Crawford said quietly. "Mr. McCaffrey, I'm going to need you to come with me. We need to have a long conversation about your whereabouts 3 years ago and your relationship with your brother." Silas's composure finally broke. "Harold, help me. You promised you'd protect me. You said if I kept quiet and stayed hidden, you'd make sure I was safe." "Shut up," Harold roared, but it was too late. "You promised," Silas continued desperately. "You said we'd use the money to build something great, that we'd be rich and powerful and no one would ever touch us, but you left me rotting in that shack while you lived like a king." I said, "Shut up." Harold lunged toward his brother, but Sheriff Briggs and his deputy intercepted him, forcing him back. Marshal Crawford's expression had gone cold and hard. "So you did know about the robbery. You knew your brother was involved, and you used the stolen money for your own purposes." He turned to Briggs. "Sheriff, arrest Harold McCaffrey as an accessory after the fact to robbery and murder." "Now wait just a minute," Harold started, but Briggs was already pulling out shackles. "You have the right to remain silent," Briggs said, and there was satisfaction in his voice, "though I notice you and your brother both seem to have trouble with that." As the reality of his situation sank in, Harold's rage transformed into something uglier. Desperate calculation. "You can't prove anything. So what if I knew Silas was involved? That doesn't make me guilty of anything. I was protecting my family." "You were using stolen money," Crawford said. "That makes you guilty of receiving stolen goods at minimum. And if we can prove you actively helped your brother evade justice, that's accessory charges. You're looking at federal prison, Mr. McCaffrey." "Wait," Silas said suddenly. "Wait, I can make a deal, right? If I testify, if I tell you everything, you'll reduce my sentence?" "Silas, don't you dare," Harold began. "I'm not hanging for you," Silas shouted. "I'm not dying because you were too greedy to just let me disappear. You had to use the money, had to flaunt it, had to try to become the biggest rancher in the territory. And when that Jennings kid showed up at the Double W, you had to go after him, had to make sure he stayed quiet. Well, guess what, brother? I'm not staying quiet anymore." Marshal Crawford exchanged a look with Sheriff Briggs. "Mr. McCaffrey, if you're willing to provide sworn testimony about the Silverton robbery, including the identities of your accomplices and the location of any remaining stolen money, I'm authorized to negotiate with the prosecutor on your behalf." "Don't do this, Silas," Harold said, and there was pleading in his voice now. We're family. We're blood." "You left me in that shack like a dog," Silas said bitterly. "Coming by once a month with supplies and orders to stay hidden, stay quiet, don't make trouble, while you were buying up land and playing the big man in town. So yeah, I'll talk. I'll tell them everything." He turned to the marshal. "There were 4 of us in the Silverton job. Me, Jack Reeves, Cole Brennan, and Reeves's cousin Danny. We'd been planning it for months, getting information from Luke Jennings without him knowing what we were really after. The kid thought we were going to rob a corrupt bank manager, redistribute wealth to the poor." Silas laughed bitterly. He was naive enough to believe it. Clara felt Luke go rigid in the cell beside hers. Through the bars she could see his face, pale, stricken, vindicated all at once. 3 years of being called a murderer, and finally someone was telling the truth. "The night of the robbery, everything went wrong," Silas continued. "The manager fought back, pulled a gun. Jack panicked and shot him. Then these 2 customers started screaming, and Jack shot them too. I told him to stop, told him we weren't supposed to kill anyone, but he'd gone crazy. We grabbed the money and ran." "And Luke Jennings?" Crawford asked. "We shot him because he'd seen our faces, heard our real names. Jack figured if we left him for dead, everyone would think he was the ringleader. And it worked, at least for a while." Silas met Luke's eyes through the bars. "I'm sorry, kid. For what it's worth, I never wanted you to take the fall for this. But Jack said it was him or us, and I chose us." "Where are Jack Reeves and the others now?" Crawford demanded. Jack and Danny headed south last I heard, somewhere in Mexico, spending their share of the money. Cole Brennan went east, maybe Kansas or Missouri. We split up after the robbery, agreed never to contact each other again. Silas's voice turned bitter. Harold was supposed to keep my share safe, help me start over somewhere clean. Instead, he used it to build his empire and left me hiding like a criminal. You are a criminal, Harold spat, and now you're a rat too. I'm a survivor, Silas corrected. Same as you, except I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. Marshal Crawford motioned to his deputies. Take both McCaffrey brothers into custody. Sheriff Briggs, I'll need statements from you and Mr. Walker about how this evidence was discovered. And he turned toward the cells where Clara and Luke waited. I'll need to speak with Luke Jennings. To arrest him? Clara asked, her voice tight with fear. To take his statement, Crawford corrected. If what Silas McCaffrey says is true, then Luke Jennings was a victim, not a perpetrator. The charges against him should be dropped. Clara felt her knees go weak. Dropped? Pending verification of Silas's testimony, yes. Crawford's expression softened slightly. Miss Jennings, your brother may have used poor judgment in trusting the wrong people, but if he didn't commit the murders and didn't knowingly participate in the robbery, then he's not guilty of the crimes he's been charged with. Sheriff Briggs was already unlocking the cells. Clara stumbled out, her legs unsteady after 2 days of confinement. Luke emerged more slowly, looking dazed, like a man who'd been bracing for death and suddenly found himself granted life. I don't understand, Luke said hoarsely. You're saying I'm free? Not yet, Crawford cautioned. There's still paperwork, still official procedures, but based on the evidence in Silas McCaffrey's confession, I see no reason to transport you back to Colorado for execution. Instead, you'll remain here under Sheriff Briggs's supervision while I coordinate with the authorities there to have the charges formally dismissed. How long will that take? Clara asked. A few weeks, maybe a month. Crawford shrugged. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they do turn. In the meantime, Luke Jennings is to consider himself released on his own recognizance, with the understanding that he'll make himself available for any further questioning. Clara turned to her brother and threw her arms around him, both of them shaking with relief and disbelief. 3 years. 3 years of running and hiding and waiting for death. And now, in the space of a single afternoon, it was over. I can't believe it, Luke whispered against her hair. Clara, I can't believe we're going to live. Believe it, she said fiercely. Believe it and never forget who made it possible. She looked over Luke's shoulder at Ethan, who stood watching them with exhaustion and satisfaction written across his features. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, and something deeper that Clara didn't yet have words for. Thank you, she mouthed. Ethan's tired face split into a smile that transformed him. Later, he mouthed back. We'll talk later. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Marshal Crawford took detailed statements from everyone involved. Luke, Clara, Ethan, Will, even Abigail, who arrived at the jail looking terrified but determined to tell what she knew about the bank records. Silas McCaffrey was locked in a cell, and Harold McCaffrey was transported to the territorial prison in Helena to await trial. The whole town seemed to be gathered in the street outside the jail, drawn by the incredible news that Harold McCaffrey had been arrested, that Luke Jennings was innocent, that everything they'd believed about the horse thief and her outlaw brother had been a lie. Clara heard their whispers through the window as she gave her statement to the marshal. Can you believe it? Harold McCaffrey was behind it all. I never trusted that man. Always seemed too eager to be the big shot in town. That poor Jennings girl. We treated her terribly. Ethan Walker's a hero bringing in Silas like that. The vindication should have felt sweet, but Clara was too exhausted to savor it. All she wanted was to be done with statements and questions and legal proceedings. She wanted to sleep for a week. She wanted to hold her brother and reassure herself he was really alive and free. She wanted to talk to Ethan about what came next. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan appeared in the doorway of the room where she was giving her statement. Marshal, is Miss Jennings free to go? She's been through a lot, and I'd like to get her back to the ranch where she can rest. Crawford glanced up from his notes. I have what I need for now. Miss Jennings, you're free to go, with the same understanding as your brother. You'll make yourself available if we have follow-up questions. Of course, Clara said, standing on shaky legs. Ethan was there immediately, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. Come on, let's get you out of here. They stepped out into the late afternoon sun, and Clara blinked against the brightness after 2 days in a dim cell. The crowd in the street parted as they walked toward where Will had the horses ready. Some people stared openly, while others looked away in shame. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house stepped forward, wringing her hands. Miss Jennings, I owe you an apology. I should never have thrown you out, should never have believed the worst without hearing your side of the story. It's fine, Clara said tiredly, though it wasn't. None of this was fine, but she didn't have the energy for anger. It's not fine, Ethan said sharply. You and everyone else in this town treated Clara like a criminal based on nothing but rumors and Harold McCaffrey's lies. She deserves better than a half-hearted apology now that the truth is out. Mrs. Henderson flushed and stepped back. Others in the crowd looked uncomfortable, and Clara realized that Ethan's words had struck home. These people would have watched her hang without ever questioning whether she was guilty. They would have let McCaffrey's accusations destroy her because it was easier than standing up for what was right. Let it go, Clara said softly to Ethan. Please, I just want to go home. Home. The word surprised her as soon as she said it. The Double W wasn't her home. She'd been there less than 3 days, but somehow it felt more like home than anywhere she'd been in the past 3 years. They rode out of town as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Luke rode beside them on a borrowed horse, looking stronger than he had that morning, but still dazed by their sudden reversal of fortune. Will brought up the rear, keeping a protective eye on all of them. No one spoke much during the ride. There was too much to process, too many emotions churning just beneath the surface. Relief and exhaustion and the strange hollow feeling that came after surviving something that should have killed you. By the time they reached the Double W, full dark had fallen and stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Martha met them at the door with tears streaming down her face. Thank God, she said, pulling Clara into a fierce hug. Thank God you're safe. When Will rode into town to find you already in custody, I thought... She couldn't finish, just held Clara tight and wept. I'm okay, Clara said, though she wasn't sure it was true. We're okay, Martha. Inside, the ranch house was warm and bright. Martha had prepared a feast, roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, apple pie. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd seen so much food, and her stomach growled despite her exhaustion. They sat around the table, Clara, Luke, Ethan, Will, Martha, and the 3 ranch hands who'd helped search for Silas. The conversation was subdued at first, everyone still processing the day's events. But gradually, as the food and warmth did their work, the tension began to ease. I still can't believe you found him, Luke said to Ethan. Silas could have been anywhere in the territories. How did you know where to look? Process of elimination, Ethan said. I figured he had to be close enough for Harold to keep tabs on him, but far enough from town that no one would stumble across him by accident. That meant the high country, probably one of the old line shacks or abandoned cabins from the mining days. There must be dozens of those, Will said. 47, according to the old maps at the land office, Ethan confirmed. I checked 12 of them before I found the one where Silas was hiding. Pure luck, really. If he'd been at number 13 instead of number 12, I wouldn't have found him in time. It wasn't luck, Clara said quietly. It was determination and courage, and refusal to give up when everyone else would have. Ethan met her eyes across the table, and that current of understanding passed between them again. I told you I'd fix it, he said simply. I don't break my promises. After dinner, Martha shooed everyone out of the kitchen so she could clean up, despite Clara's protests that she should help. You need rest, not chores, Martha said firmly. Go on, get some air. You've been cooped up in that cell for 2 days. Clara stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air. Behind her, she heard Luke and Will discussing plans for the next few weeks, the legal proceedings that still lay ahead. But she couldn't focus on their conversation. Her mind was too full of everything that had happened, everything that had almost happened. Boots scraped on the wooden boards, and Ethan appeared beside her. He'd cleaned up, washed the dust and blood from his face, but he still looked exhausted. "You should sleep," Clara said. "So should you," Ethan countered, "but I'm guessing neither of us will, at least not yet." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Finally, Clara spoke. "You almost died today, didn't you? Finding Silas. What makes you say that? The blood on your face, the way you moved when you came into the jail, favoring your left side. Someone hurt you." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Silas didn't want to be found. He fought when I tried to bring him in, got a few good hits in before I managed to subdue him." "You could have been killed," Clara said, her voice tight. "Over me, over my brother, over people you barely know." "I know you well enough," Ethan said. "And anyway, it wasn't about knowing you for years or days or hours. It was about doing what was right." "Why?" Clara demanded, turning to face him. "Why risk everything for us? You keep saying it's about right and wrong, about answered prayers and purpose. But Ethan, you could have died. Your life could have ended today because you decided to help two strangers. Why would you do that?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his expression difficult to read in the starlight. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. "Because 6 months ago, I was dying in a blizzard, and I prayed for a reason to live. I asked God why he would save me, what purpose I could possibly serve, and then I spent months drifting, working, going through the motions without any real understanding of why I was still here." He took a step closer to Clara. "And then I saw you in that street with a mob ready to hang you, and something clicked into place, like a key turning in a lock. I knew that this was why, that you were why." "That's not fair to you," Clara whispered, "to make your whole purpose about saving me." "It's not just about saving you," Ethan said. "It's about what you represent, second chances, fighting for the underdog, standing up against injustice even when it's dangerous. Those are the things I lost sight of when I was a bounty hunter, when I was putting money over mercy." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You reminded me what it means to be the kind of man I want to be. And yeah, I would have died for that. I would have died for you." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Ethan said gently. "Not tonight. Tonight, you just need to rest and let yourself believe that you're really safe, that the nightmare is really over." "Is it over?" Clara asked. "Harold's still alive, his men are still out there, and Silas's testimony might not hold up in court. What if—" "No," Ethan interrupted firmly. "No more what-ifs. Clara, you've spent 3 years living in fear of the next bad thing. You've earned the right to just breathe for a while without always waiting for disaster." "I don't know how," Clara admitted. "I don't know how to not be afraid." "Then I'll teach you," Ethan said simply. "One day at a time, starting tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" Ethan smiled. "Tomorrow, you sleep late. Then you have a good breakfast. Then maybe you help Martha in the garden, or go riding, or do anything else that strikes your fancy. And you do it all without looking over your shoulder or waiting for someone to accuse you of something. That sounds impossible." "So did proving Luke's innocence," Ethan pointed out. "But we did it anyway." Clara found herself smiling despite everything. "You're very sure of yourself." "Not really," Ethan admitted, "but I'm very sure of you. And I'm very sure that whatever comes next, we can face it together." Together. The word hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Clara knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart after everything she'd been through. But standing here with Ethan under the stars, after he'd risked everything to save her, caution felt like cowardice. "Ethan," she said softly, "earlier in the jail, you said you had something to ask me, when this was all over." "I did say that," Ethan agreed. "Well, it's over, so ask." Ethan took both her hands in his, and Clara could feel the calluses on his palms, the strength in his grip. "Clara Jennings, I know we've only known each other a few days. I know you have every reason to be wary of trusting people, especially men who make big promises. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I see my future. I see the reason I survived that blizzard and the purpose I've been searching for." "Ethan, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight or even to say you love me. I'm just asking if you'll stay. Here, at the Double W. Give yourself time to heal, time to figure out who you are when you're not running. And give me time to prove that what I feel for you isn't just gratitude or relief or some misguided sense of destiny. Give me time to earn your trust and your heart." Clara's breath caught. "You want me to stay here, at the ranch?" "Will and Martha have already offered you a permanent place," Ethan said. "They like you, Clara. They see in you what I see, strength and courage and a good heart that's been battered but not broken. Stay here. Build a life here. Let us be the family you deserve." "What about Luke?" "Luke too, if he wants. Will can always use another good hand, and Lord knows your brother has earned a fresh start." Ethan's grip on her hands tightened. "But Clara, I'm asking about you." "What do you want?" What did she want? For 3 years, Clara had been so focused on survival that she'd never let herself think about wants or dreams or anything beyond making it to tomorrow. But standing here with Ethan, safe and free and surrounded by people who'd fought for her, she found herself daring to imagine a different kind of life. A life where she wasn't defined by her brother's mistakes or her own suffering. A life where she could put down roots and build something lasting. A life where she might, possibly, allow herself to fall in love with a cowboy who'd lied to save her and then moved heaven and earth to make that lie into truth. "I want to stay," she said finally. "I want to stop running and start living. And I want—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want to see where this goes, you and me, whatever this is." Ethan's smile could have lit up the entire Montana territory. "That's all I needed to hear." He pulled her close then, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like safety and home and promise all rolled together. Clara let herself lean into his warmth, let herself believe, just for this moment, that maybe the worst was really behind her. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other under the stars. Inside the house, Clara could hear Luke's laughter at something Will said, Martha's voice calling someone to help with the dishes. Normal sounds, family sounds. "Thank you," Clara whispered against Ethan's chest, "for everything, for saving me, for believing in me, for not giving up." "Thank you for being worth saving," Ethan replied. "Though I should point out, you saved yourself too. You're the one who survived 3 years of hell. You're the one who refused to give up even when you were locked in that cell waiting to die. I just gave you the tools. You did the hard work of staying alive." Clara pulled back to look up at him. "Is that what you think? That I'm strong?" "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met," Ethan said seriously. "And I think the town that called you trouble is going to eat their words when they see what you're really capable of." "What if I don't want to prove anything to them?" Clara asked. "What if I just want to live quietly and never think about Blackwater Creek again?" "Then we'll do that," Ethan promised. "The ranch is 12 miles from town. You never have to set foot there again if you don't want to." But even as he said it, Clara knew it wasn't true. She would have to go back to town eventually. For supplies, for legal proceedings, for all the mundane necessities of life. And when she did, she would face the people who'd been ready to watch her hang. The thought didn't fill her with fear like it once would have. Instead, she felt something closer to determination. Let them see her. Let them see that their judgment and cruelty hadn't broken her. Let them see what it looked like when someone refused to be defined by other people's hatred. "I'll go back to town," she said aloud. "Not tomorrow, but soon. And I'll walk down that main street with my head held high, and I'll show them that Clara Jennings isn't trouble. She's a survivor." Ethan's eyes shone with pride. "That's my girl. My girl." The possessiveness in those words should have bothered Clara, should have triggered her defenses after years of being vulnerable and alone. But coming from Ethan, they felt different. They felt like belonging. The door opened and Luke stepped out, then stopped short when he saw them standing close together. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Clara said, stepping back from Ethan but keeping hold of his hand. "What is it?" "Martha said there's a room ready for me in the bunkhouse," Luke said, "and Will offered me a permanent job if I want it. Starting tomorrow, if I'm up for it." That's wonderful," Clara said warmly. "Yeah." Luke's expression was complicated. grateful, uncertain, still processing everything. Listen, Clara, I know I said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For everything, for the robbery, for making you run, for the past 3 years. I was young and stupid and I trusted the wrong people, and you paid the price for my mistakes. We both paid, Clara corrected gently. But it's over now, Luke. We get to start fresh. Do we, though? Luke asked. I mean, the legal charges might be dropped, but people will remember. They'll always remember that I was accused of murder, that you were accused of being my accomplice. That doesn't just disappear. No, Ethan agreed. It doesn't. But you get to decide what you do with that memory. You can let it define you, or you can use it as motivation to become someone better. Luke looked at him for a long moment. Is that what you did after you quit bounty hunting? I'm trying, Ethan said honestly. Some days are easier than others, but yeah, that's the goal. To be someone I can be proud of when I look in the mirror. I want that too, Luke said quietly. I want to be the kind of man my sister deserves to call her brother, the kind of man who doesn't let her down. Then be that man, Ethan said simply. Starting tomorrow. One day, one choice at a time. Luke nodded slowly, then turned to go. At the door, he paused and looked back at them. Ethan, thank you for saving her, for saving both of us. I know I can never repay what you've done, but I swear to you, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. Just take care of your sister, Ethan said. That's all the repayment I need. After Luke disappeared inside, Clara and Ethan returned to their comfortable silence. The night had grown colder, and Clara shivered slightly. Ethan immediately shrugged out of his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. You'll freeze, she protested. I'll be fine, he assured her. Besides, we should probably head in soon anyway. You need sleep, and I need to check on the horses before I turn in. They walked together toward the barn, their hands still linked. Inside, the horses nickered softly in their stalls, disturbed by the late-night visitors. Ethan moved among them with easy familiarity, checking water buckets and adjusting blankets. Clara watched him work, seeing him properly for the first time since the chaos of the afternoon. He moved with the unconscious grace of someone completely at home in his body, confident and capable. There was a bruise darkening his jaw where Silas must have hit him, and she could see the careful way he moved his left side where he'd been injured. Let me see, she said, stepping closer. See what? Your injury, the one you're trying to hide. Ethan hesitated, then slowly lifted his shirt to reveal an angry purple bruise spreading across his ribs. Clara sucked in a breath. Silas kicked me when we were fighting, Ethan explained. It's not as bad as it looks. It looks terrible, Clara said, her fingers hovering over the bruise without quite touching it. You should have Martha look at it. She might have something to help with the swelling. I will, tomorrow. Ethan lowered his shirt. Clara, I'm fine. A few bruises are nothing compared to what could have happened if I hadn't found Silas in time. You could have broken ribs, Clara said worriedly. You could have internal bleeding. I don't, Ethan said firmly. Trust me, I know what broken ribs feel like. This is just bruising. It'll heal. Clara wanted to argue, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He'd been running on adrenaline and determination for the past 30 hours, and now that the crisis was over, he was crashing hard. Come on, she said gently. You need sleep more than these horses need checking on. Yes, ma'am, Ethan said with a tired smile. They walked back to the main house together. At the door, Clara hesitated, suddenly unsure. Where exactly was she supposed to sleep? Martha had mentioned a room, but Clara couldn't remember which one. As if reading her mind, Martha appeared. Your room is upstairs, second door on the left. I've put out clean night clothes, and there's a pitcher of water for washing. If you need anything else, just holler. Thank you, Martha, Clara said, overwhelmed again by the kindness of these people. For everything. No thanks needed, honey, Martha said warmly. You're family now, and we take care of our family. Family. There was that word again, the one that had meant nothing but pain and complication for the past 3 years. But here, in this place, with these people, it was starting to mean something different, something better. Clara climbed the stairs slowly, her body finally acknowledging how exhausted she was. The room Martha had prepared was small but comfortable, a real bed with a thick quilt, a washstand with a mirror, a chair by the window. More luxury than Clara had known in years. She washed quickly, changed into the nightgown Martha had left, and crawled into bed. The sheets were clean and soft, the mattress infinitely better than the wooden bench in the jail cell. She should have fallen asleep immediately. Instead, she lay awake, her mind racing through everything that had happened. 2 days ago, she'd ridden into Blackwater Creek expecting nothing more than another temporary stop in her endless flight from the past. Now, she was lying in a real bed in a real home, surrounded by people who'd fought for her, with a future that actually existed beyond tomorrow. And somewhere in this house, Ethan Walker was also lying awake, nursing his injuries and probably replaying the day's events. The man who'd saved her life. The man who'd looked at her and seen someone worth fighting for. The man who'd asked her to stay. Clara pressed her face into the pillow, overwhelmed by emotions she didn't have names for. Gratitude, certainly. Relief, absolutely. But underneath those surface feelings was something deeper, something that felt dangerously like hope. For the first time in 3 years, Clara Jennings allowed herself to hope. To imagine a future that involved more than just survival. To dream about what life might look like when she wasn't running. And as she finally drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Ethan's smile when she'd said she would stay. That smile had promised things she didn't dare believe in yet. Safety, belonging, maybe even love. But for tonight, for this moment, it was enough to know that she wasn't alone anymore. That someone had chosen to stand beside her when the whole world seemed determined to see her fall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about what came next. There would still be legal proceedings to navigate, a town full of judgment to face, wounds to heal, both physical and emotional. But tonight, Clara Jennings slept peacefully for the first time in 3 long years. And in that sleep, she dreamed not of running, but of staying. Not of fear, but of possibility. Not of being trouble, but of being found. Being home. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was, and panic seized her chest. The old instinct to run, to hide, to prepare for whatever accusation or threat was coming next. Then memory returned in a warm rush, and she remembered. She was safe. She was free. The nightmare was over. She dressed slowly in the clothes Martha had left folded on the chair, a simple blue calico dress that fit reasonably well, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was alive with morning activity. Martha stood at the stove flipping pancakes. Will sat at the table reading a newspaper that had arrived from Helena, and through the window Clara could see ranch hands heading out to start the day's work. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Martha said cheerfully. "I was starting to think you'd sleep until noon." Clara glanced at the clock on the mantel and was shocked to see it was nearly 10. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Hush," Martha interrupted firmly. "You needed the rest. Sit down and eat. I've made enough pancakes to feed an army." Clara sat, and Martha placed a plate in front of her piled high with golden pancakes, bacon, and eggs. The smell alone made her mouth water, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real breakfast instead of just grabbing whatever she could afford. "Where's Ethan?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Out mending fence on the south pasture," Will said without looking up from his paper. "He was up before dawn, said he needed to work off some energy. That boy never could sit still when his mind was churning." "Is Luke with him?" "Yep. Put your brother to work right away. Figured keeping busy would help him adjust better than sitting around thinking." Will finally looked up, his weathered face kind.